I'm standing at my grandmother's funeral when my phone buzzes. It's a voicemail I'll never forget. Congratulations on closing escrow for the Blake property. My blood runs cold. I haven't closed anything. I haven't sold anything. That house, my grandmother's $500,000 home, was supposed to be mine. She promised it to me. She raised me in that house. Every room holds a memory of the woman who loved me more than anyone. But as I look across the cemetery, I see my mother whispering urgently to my father and sister. They won't meet my eyes. And suddenly I understand. They sold it. 3 days after we buried Grandma May, they sold my inheritance out from under me. And they're using the money for a vacation to Hawaii posted all over social media while I'm drowning in grief and betrayal. When I call my mother, she's ice cold. I'm the executor. You're just the granddaughter. Deal with it. I'm devastated, destroyed, ready to give up. Then my grandmother's lawyer calls with 6 words that change everything. They forgot to read the fine print. Turns out Grandma May knew exactly what kind of person my mother was. And 20 years ago, she set a trap, a legal masterpiece that would only spring if someone tried to steal from me. My mother thinks she won, but she has no idea what's coming. What Grandma left behind wasn't just a house. It was just as cold, calculated, and absolutely devastating. And by the time this story is over, my mother will lose far more than money. She'll lose everything. My name is Jennifer Blake. I'm 38 years old, and for the past 15 years, I've worked as a librarian at the Riverside Public Library, a quiet job that suits me perfectly. I've never been one for drama or conflict. I suppose that's why what happened after my grandmother's funeral hit me so hard. I wasn't prepared for betrayal, especially not from my own family, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning on that gray Tuesday in March when we laid Grandma May to rest. The rain started just as the service began, a soft drizzle that tapped against the stained glass windows of St. Augustine's Church like gentle fingers. I sat in the front pew, clutching a damp tissue, watching the closed casket draped in white lilies. May would have liked the lilies. She'd always kept fresh flowers in her house, even when money was tight. Behind me, I could hear the gentle murmur of the community she'd served for so many years. Neighbors, friends from the senior center where she'd volunteered every Thursday, the ladies from her book club. They'd come to pay their respects to a woman who'd given so much to everyone around her. Pastor Williams spoke about May's generosity, her quick laugh, the way she'd baked pies for newcomers to the neighborhood, and never missed a chance to help someone in need. As he talked, memories flooded through me. I was 7 years old when my biological mother, Sarah, died in a car accident. May didn't hesitate. She took me in, raised me as her own, and never once made me feel like a burden. She taught me to read by tracing words in old library books. She taught me to bake her famous apple pie. And she taught me something else, something she repeated so often it became a kind of mantra. Always check the fine print, Jenny. The truth is, in the details, people hope you won't notice. I glanced to my right where my mother Carol sat with her arms crossed, her face impassive. At 59, Carol had the same sharp features as May, but none of her warmth. Her phone screen glowed in her lap as she scrolled through something, barely listening to the eulogy. My father, Ray, 62 and graying at the temples, sat beside her, looking deeply uncomfortable, his eyes fixed on his shoes. On Carol's other side was my younger sister, Megan, 33, who kept checking her watch and whispering to our father. None of them were crying. None of them seemed to be grieving at all. The contrast made my chest ache. I'd spent the last 6 months caring for May as her health declined, managing her medications, driving her to doctor's appointments, reading to her every evening when her eyes grew too tired. Carol had visited maybe twice in that entire time, both visits lasting less than an hour. Megan hadn't come at all, always too busy with her photography business or her social life. Ray would occasionally drop by, but he never stayed long, always seeming eager to leave. After the service, we gathered in the church hall for the reception. Women from May's book club had prepared sandwiches and coffee. People approached me with kind words and shared memories, but I felt numb moving through the motions of acceptance and gratitude, while my heart broke quietly. Across the room, I noticed Carol, Ray, and Megan huddled together near the coat rack, their heads close together in urgent conversation. Carol's voice, though hushed, carried an edge of excitement rather than grief. I caught fragments. Finally take that trip. And Hawaii sounds perfect. And won't have to wait much longer. Something cold settled in my stomach. I moved closer, trying to look casual as I reached for my coat nearby. Megan was saying something about booking flights for next week when she noticed me. Her expression shifted instantly, a bright fake smile replacing whatever calculation had been there a moment before. "Oh, Jenny," she said, her tone saccharine. "We were just talking about, how Grandma would want us to celebrate her life, not be sad." "By going to Hawaii?" I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Carol turned to me, her eyes cool. "We all grieve differently, Jennifer. Some of us choose to honor the dead by living fully. You might try it sometime instead of dwelling in the past." I felt my face flush. "I wanted to talk to you about Grandma's wishes. She told me she wanted a memorial at the senior center, maybe a scholarship fund in her name. I thought we could—" "That's not practical." Carol cut me off. "Mom's gone. We need to handle her affairs efficiently, not throw money at sentimental gestures." "It's not sentimental," I protested. "It's what she wanted." Megan rolled her eyes with theatrical exasperation. "Grandma's gone, Jenny. Life goes on. We can't freeze time just because you're having trouble letting go." Ray finally spoke, his voice quiet and strained. "Let's not do this here, okay? We can talk about everything later." But he wouldn't meet my eyes, and I knew with sudden sick certainty that something was wrong. They were planning something. The way they closed ranks when I approached, the way Carol's expression hardened when I mentioned May's wishes, the way Megan's fake sympathy dripped with contempt. They were a united front, and I was on the outside. Before I could press further, a hand touched my elbow. I turned to find Marian Feld, May's attorney, standing beside me. Marian was in her mid-60s with steel-gray hair cut in a precise bob and sharp, intelligent eyes behind frameless glasses. She'd been May's lawyer for over 20 years, handling everything from her will to the trust documents May had set up. "Jennifer, could I have a word?" Marian asked, her tone gentle but purposeful. Carol's attention snapped to Marian immediately. "Actually, Marian, I need to talk to you about the estate. As executor, I'll need to understand the timeline for liquidating assets. The house specifically, how quickly can we get that on the market?" Marian's expression remained professionally neutral, but I caught a slight tightening around her eyes. "All matters regarding May's estate will be addressed at the proper time, Carol. I have appointments scheduled with all interested parties." "I'm just trying to be efficient," Carol pressed. "No point letting the house sit empty accumulating costs. The market's good right now. We should move fast." "Everything will be handled according to May's wishes and legal requirements," Marian said firmly. "Now, if you'll excuse us." She guided me a few steps away, her hand still on my elbow. When we were out of earshot, her voice dropped. "Jennifer, I need you to come to my office this week, Wednesday morning if possible." "Is something wrong?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Marian's gaze flicked briefly to where Carol stood watching us, then back to me. "Your grandmother was very specific about certain legal arrangements. Very specific. And very thorough." She squeezed my hand, and for just a moment, something that might have been sympathy, or perhaps satisfaction, flickered across her face. "Your grandmother prepared for every possibility, Jennifer. Every single one. Come see me Wednesday at 9. I wanted to ask more, but Carol was already moving toward us, her expression sharp with suspicion. Marian released my hand and turned away, gathering her coat with brisk efficiency. As she left, I caught her final words spoken so quietly I almost missed them. "Check the fine print, dear, just like May taught you." The rest of that afternoon passed in a blur of uncomfortable condolences and strained small talk. By the time I left the church, the rain had stopped, leaving everything damp and gray. I drove home to my small apartment across town, my mind spinning with questions. What had Marian meant? What arrangements had May made? And why did my family seem so eager to sell May's house, the house where I'd grown up, the house May had promised would someday be mine? 2 months passed. 2 months of silence from my family, of unreturned calls and ignored texts. I tried to reach Carol about May's memorial, about her belongings, about anything, but got only brief, dismissive responses. Handled, Carol would text, or not a good time. I visited Marion once, but she'd only said that the estate was still in probate and things would become clear soon. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon in May, I was shelving books in the library's history section when my phone buzzed with a voicemail notification. The number was unfamiliar. Curious, I stepped into the back office and pressed play. The voice was cheerful, professional, utterly routine. "Hi, this message is for Jennifer Blake. This is Stephanie from Coastal Title Company calling to congratulate you on the successful closing of escrow for the Blake property at 2547 Maple Street. All documents have been recorded with the county. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to call us back. Again, congratulations and thank you for choosing Coastal Title." The phone slipped from my hand, clattering on the desk. The Blake property, 2547 Maple Street. That was May's house. My house. The house May had promised me 100 times. "This will be yours someday, Jenny," she'd said during one of our last conversations. "You'll know what to do with it." But I hadn't closed any escrow. I hadn't sold anything. I hadn't even been contacted about a sale. My hands shook as I picked up the phone and called the number back. A woman answered on the second ring, the same cheerful voice from the message. "Coastal Title, this is Stephanie. How can I help you?" "This is Jennifer Blake," I said, my voice thin and strange. "And I just got a message about a closing, but I don't understand. I didn't authorize any sale." There was a pause. "Oh, let me pull up the file." I heard typing, then a longer pause. "Okay, I'm looking at it now. The Blake property closed 3 weeks ago. Sale price $500,000. The seller of record is listed as Carol Blake, executor of the May Blake estate." The room tilted. 3 weeks ago. "Yes, ma'am. May 15th. Her voice had lost some of its cheerfulness, now tinged with confusion and concern. "Is there a problem? I need to go." I managed and ended the call. 3 weeks ago. That was less than a week after May's funeral. Carol had sold my grandmother's house, sold it without telling me, without asking me, without even mentioning it, and they were probably already spending the money. That Hawaii trip they'd been whispering about at the funeral. They'd done it. They'd actually done it. I sat at my desk, staring at nothing as betrayal washed over me in waves. My mother had stolen my inheritance. My father and sister had helped her do it. And I'd been completely, utterly blindsided. For 10 minutes, I sat frozen at my desk in the library's back office, staring at my phone like it might suddenly explain how my entire world had just collapsed. The words kept echoing in my head. Carol Blake, executor. Sale price $500,000. Proceeds split 3 ways. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest, all the air knocked out of my lungs, leaving me gasping and dizzy. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold the phone as I pulled up Carol's contact information. Part of me wanted to scream at her to unleash all the hurt and fury building inside me. But another part, the part May had raised to be calm and thoughtful, needed answers first. I needed to understand how this had happened, how my own mother could have betrayed me so completely. The phone rang 4 times before Carol answered, her voice bright and relaxed. "Jennifer, this is a surprise. What's up? What's up?" I repeated, my voice cracking. "Mom, I just got a call from a title company. They said Grandma's house was sold 3 weeks ago." 3 weeks? You sold it without even telling me." There was a pause, and I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. When she spoke again, the brightness was gone, replaced by something harder. "Oh, well, I suppose you were going to find out eventually." "Find out?" I couldn't believe how casual she sounded, like we were discussing grocery shopping instead of the theft of my inheritance. Mom, that house was supposed to be mine. Grandma promised it to me. We talked about it dozens of times. She said I'd know what to do with it, that it would be my home someday. Carol's laugh was sharp and dismissive. A promise, really, Jennifer? Where is that promise in writing? Because I'm looking at legal documents that say I'm the executor of Mother's estate, which means I have the authority to make decisions about her assets. And I made a decision. But you didn't even tell me, I said, and I hated how my voice sounded small and hurt like a child's. You didn't ask me, you didn't discuss it with me, you just sold it behind my back. I don't need your permission, Carol snapped. The house was part of the estate. There were debts to settle, expenses to cover. I did what needed to be done. What debts? I demanded. Grandma's house was paid off. She told me that herself. What possible debts could require selling a $500,000 house without even talking to me first? Carol's voice grew vague, evasive. There were maintenance costs, property taxes, medical bills from her final months. Things add up, Jennifer. You wouldn't understand the complexity of managing an estate. I wouldn't understand. Anger was starting to burn through the shock now. I was the one taking care of her for the last 6 months. I know exactly what her medical costs were. Insurance covered most of it, and her savings covered the rest. You're lying to me. Watch your tone, Carol said, her voice turning icy. I don't appreciate being accused of lying by my own daughter. I made the responsible choice. I sold the house, I settled the estate efficiently, and frankly, we needed the money. The word came out as barely a whisper. Your father, Megan, and I, Carol said, and now there was something almost defiant in her tone, like she was daring me to challenge her. We split the proceeds 3 ways. It was only fair given everything we've dealt with these past few months. The stress, the arrangements, all the responsibility fell on us. You spent it already, I said, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. That Hawaii trip you were talking about at the funeral, that's where the money went. We used some of it for a vacation, yes? Carol said coolly. We needed time to heal from our grief, to process Mother's death as a family. Surely even you can understand that. I wasn't invited to heal with you, I said, my voice breaking. You sold my grandmother's house, split the money between yourselves, and went on vacation without me. How is that fair? How is any of this fair? Life isn't fair, Jennifer, Carol said, and her voice had gone cold as winter. You need to grow up and accept that. I'm the executor. I made a legal decision. If you don't like it, that's your problem, not mine. Grandma wanted me to have that house, I said desperately. You know she did. Everyone knows she did. What I know, Carol said, each word sharp and deliberate, is that you're upset and not thinking clearly. What I know is that I raised you after your real mother died. I took you in. I fed you. I put a roof over your head for 11 years. Maybe you should remember that before you start accusing me of wrongdoing. Maybe you should remember who really took care of you. The cruelty of it took my breath away. She was using Sarah's death, using my childhood grief as a weapon against me. That's not fair, I whispered. I said life isn't fair. Now I have things to do, Jennifer. I suggest you accept reality and move on. This conversation is over. The line went dead before I could respond. I sat there holding the phone, tears streaming down my face, feeling more alone than I had since the day May died. My mother had stolen from me. My father had helped her do it. My sister had participated willingly, and now Carol was throwing my childhood trauma in my face to justify it all. For a long moment, I considered just giving up. What could I do? Carol was right that she was the executor. Maybe I really had no legal standing. Maybe May's promises to me were just words legally meaningless, and I was being childish and naive to think they mattered. Then I remembered Marion's words at the funeral. Your grandmother prepared for every possibility. And later, check the fine print, dear. My hands were still shaking, but I managed to pull up Marion's office number and dial. The receptionist told me Marion was in court and would return calls later that afternoon. I left an urgent message, trying to keep my voice steady, then sat in the back office of the library for the next 3 hours, unable to work, unable to think about anything except the betrayal that kept playing over and over in my mind. When my phone finally rang at 4:30, Marion's name lit up the screen. I answered before the second ring. "Jennifer," Marion said, her voice calm and professional. "I got your message. Tell me everything." So I did. I told her about the title company's call about Carol selling the house 3 weeks after the funeral, about the money being split and spent on a vacation. I told her about Carol's cold dismissal of May's promises, about the vague claims of debts that didn't exist, about the threat at the end. By the time I finished, I was crying again, my words coming out in gasps. Marion listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finally fell silent, she said quietly, "Jennifer, I need you to come to my office tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Can you do that?" "Yes," I managed. "Good. And Jennifer, this is very important. Say nothing to anyone about this conversation. Don't call Carol back. Don't post anything on social media. Don't discuss this with friends. Not yet. Can you promise me that?" "I promise," I said. "But Marion, what do I do? Did Mom really have the right to just sell everything? Are May's promises really meaningless?" There was a pause, and when Marion spoke again, her voice had dropped to almost a whisper. But there was something in it that made my heart beat faster, something that sounded almost like satisfaction. "Jennifer, have you ever heard of a QPRT, a Qualified Personal Residence Trust?" "No," I said, confused. "What is that?" "It's a very specific legal instrument your grandmother put in place 20 years ago," Marion said softly. "And your family just violated every single provision of it. Come see me tomorrow, Jennifer. Your grandmother anticipated this exact possibility. She prepared for it. And now they're about to learn what happens when you ignore the fine print." I barely slept that night, Marion's words echoing through my mind. A QPRT, a Qualified Personal Residence Trust. I'd never heard the term before, but something about the quiet confidence in Marion's voice had given me the first real hope I'd felt since that devastating phone call from the title company. When I arrived at her office the next morning at exactly 9 o'clock, my hands were clammy and my heart was racing. Marion's office was in an old converted Victorian house downtown, all dark wood paneling and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. She greeted me at the door herself, her expression kind but businesslike, and gestured me into her private office. On her desk sat a thick manila folder with May's name written across the tab in faded ink. "Sit down, Jennifer," she said gently, settling into her chair across from me. "I'm going to explain something your grandmother set up 2 decades ago, and I need you to listen carefully to everything before you react. Can you do that for me?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. Marion opened the folder and pulled out a stack of legal documents. The pages yellowed slightly with age. "In 2004, your grandmother came to me with a very specific request. She wanted to protect her house to ensure it would go to the person she believed truly deserved it. At the time, she'd already seen patterns in Carol's behavior that concerned her deeply. So we created something called a Qualified Personal Residence Trust, a QPRT. "What does that mean?" I asked, leaning forward. "It's a legal instrument typically used for estate tax planning," Marion explained, sliding one of the documents toward me. "Your grandmother transferred ownership of her house into this trust. She retained the right to live there for the remainder of her life, but the house itself technically belonged to the trust from that moment forward. And you, Jennifer, were named as the remainder beneficiary." I stared at the document, seeing May's signature at the bottom strong and clear. The date read March 15th, 2004. 21 years ago. "I don't understand. What does remainder beneficiary mean?" "It means that upon your grandmother's death, the house was supposed to transfer directly to you outside of the normal probate process," Marion said. "But here's the critical detail that your mother either didn't know about or chose to ignore. Under the terms of this QPRT, any sale of the property requires your explicit, written consent. Not verbal permission, not assumed agreement. Your actual signature on a consent form. My breath caught in my throat. I never signed anything. Exactly, Marion said, and now I could see that glint in her eye that I'd noticed at the funeral, something that looked almost like satisfaction. Which means the sale Carol arranged was unauthorized and legally void. Every single dollar from that transaction belongs not to Carol Ray or Megan, but to the May Blake Charitable Trust. The Charitable Trust, I repeated confused. Marion pulled out another document, this one more recent. Your grandmother amended the QPRT 5 years ago to include a very specific provision. She called it her insurance policy. If anyone attempted to sell the property without your written consent, all proceeds from that sale would automatically transfer to this charitable trust she established. The money can't be kept by the person who violated the terms. It can't be spent on vacations or personal expenses. It goes to charity immediately and irrevocably. I felt dizzy. So, the $500,000 they took legally belongs to the trust, now not to them, Marion confirmed. But it gets more interesting. The QPRT also includes a liquidated damages clause. Your grandmother anticipated that whoever violated these terms might have already spent the money, making it difficult to recover. So she built in a penalty. The violating party must repay not just the sale price, but 150% of the property's value as damages. The numbers spun in my head. 150% of $500,000. $750,000, Marion said quietly. That's what Carol Ray and Megan now owe to the charitable trust, jointly and severally, meaning each of them is individually responsible for the full amount if the others can't pay. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. The magnitude of what May had done, the sheer calculated precision of it, was staggering. There's one more thing you need to understand. Marion continued, her voice gentle but firm. The trust includes a time limit for you. You have 120 days from the date of the unauthorized sale to report the violation and claim your rights. If you stay silent, if you let that deadline pass, you lose everything. The house reverts to the general estate, and Carol's actions, while unethical, become functionally irreversible. But if I report it? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. If you report it, the sale is voided, title to the property transfers to you as the rightful remainder beneficiary, and Carol is legally obligated to repay the $750,000 in damages, Marion said. Additionally, you would inherit all of May's other assets as specified in her will, plus you'd have grounds to sue for any additional losses you've suffered due to their deception. I sat back in my chair, my mind reeling. Grandma knew, I said slowly. She knew Mom might do this. She planned for it. 20 years ago, she planned for this exact scenario. Marion's expression softened with something that looked like sadness. Jennifer, your grandmother loved Carol. She really did. But she wasn't blind to her daughter's character flaws. May told me once that she kept hoping Carol would change, that one day her daughter would choose integrity over greed. This trust was her way of setting up a test. If Carol respected your rights and May's wishes, everyone would benefit. The house would pass to you peacefully, and Carol would receive other assets from the estate. But if Carol tried to circumvent those wishes, if she chose deception and theft over honesty, then this mechanism would activate. It wasn't about revenge, I said, understanding dawning. It was about protection, and about revealing character. Exactly, Marion said. Your grandmother used to say that people show you who they really are when they think no one is watching, when they think they can get away with something. She wanted to know who truly deserved her legacy, not who was best at pretending to be worthy. I looked down at the documents spread across Marion's desk, at May's careful signatures, at the dates proving she'd thought about this for decades. My grandmother had known her own daughter might betray me, and she'd spent years building a legal fortress to protect me from that betrayal. The love in that action, the sad wisdom of it, made my throat tight with emotion. What do I do now? I asked. We gather evidence quietly, Marion said. We document everything about the sale, about where the money went, about Carol's claims regarding debts and estate expenses. We build an airtight case, and then when we're ready, we file the appropriate legal actions to enforce the terms of the trust. But Jennifer, you need to understand what this means. If you move forward with this, you'll be taking legal action against your mother, your father, and your sister. Your family will be torn apart. There's no going back from that. I thought about Carol's cold voice on the phone yesterday, about her threat regarding my childhood, about the way she'd sold May's house like it meant nothing. I thought about Megan rolling her eyes at the funeral, about Ray refusing to meet my gaze. And then I thought about May, about her gentle hands, and her warm kitchen, and her constant lesson, always check the fine print. May trusted me to do the right thing, I said finally. She chose me as her heir for a reason. I won't let her down. Marian nodded slowly, respect in her eyes. Then we'll move forward, but say nothing to anyone yet. Not to friends, not to Carol, not even to co-workers. We need to be strategic about this. I was gathering my things to leave my head still spinning with everything I'd learned when my phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out and saw a text from an unknown number. My hands went cold as I read the words, "Your family is filing a lawsuit against you. Thought you should know." I stared at the anonymous text message, my stomach dropping. Marian looked up sharply at my expression. "What is it?" she asked. I handed her my phone wordlessly. She read the message, her jaw tightening. "They're moving faster than I expected. They must suspect you've consulted an attorney." She stood and moved to her window, looking out at the street below. "They're trying to preempt your legal action by painting you as the aggressor. It's a classic intimidation tactic." 3 days later, a process server appeared at the library during my shift. Mrs. Henderson, my supervisor, gave me a concerned look as the young man handed me a thick envelope of legal documents. My hands trembled as I signed for them, aware of my co-workers' curious stares. In the break room, I tore open the envelope and read words that made my vision blur. Carol Blake, Ray Blake, and Megan Blake versus Jennifer Blake. The complaint was 17 pages long, filled with legal language that made my head spin, but certain phrases jumped out with sickening clarity. Tortious interference with contract. The lawsuit claimed I had deliberately sabotaged the house sale by contacting the title company with false allegations, causing distress and threatening the transaction. Defamation of character. Carol alleged I had spread malicious lies about her to Marian Feld and various community members, damaging her reputation and causing her severe emotional distress. And then, most shocking of all, undue influence. The complaint suggested I had manipulated May during her final months when she was allegedly mentally vulnerable, coercing her into making promises about inheritance that she wouldn't have made in sound mind. The damages they sought made me gasp $500,000 in compensatory damages, plus punitive damages to be determined at trial, plus all attorney fees and costs. They were suing me for the exact amount they'd stolen, trying to bankrupt me before I could challenge what they'd done. I called Marian immediately, reading sections aloud with a shaking voice. She listened patiently, then said something that surprised me. "Good. This actually helps us. By filing first, they've established a legal record of their position. Every claim they make now can be contradicted with evidence. Let them commit to their lies in writing. It'll make our job easier." But her reassurance did little to prepare me for what came next. That Sunday, I made the mistake of going to church, the same church where we'd held May's funeral just weeks before. I arrived a few minutes late and slipped into a back pew, hoping to find some peace in the familiar rituals. Then I saw Carol at the front, surrounded by a cluster of concerned women from the congregation. Carol's eyes were red, her voice breaking as she spoke loud enough for half the church to hear. "I just don't understand how my own daughter could do this to me. After everything I've done for her, raising her when Sarah died, giving her a home, loving her like my own. And now she's trying to steal Mother's estate, making horrible accusations, threatening legal action. It's breaking my heart." Mrs. Patterson, who'd known our family for decades, put a comforting arm around Carol's shoulders. "Oh, honey, some children just don't appreciate what they have. You did your best." I wanted to stand up, to shout the truth, to tell them all what Carol had really done, but Marion's words echoed in my mind, say nothing. So I sat frozen in the pew, feeling the curious glances and whispered conversations swirling around me until I couldn't bear it anymore and left before the service even started. By Monday afternoon, my phone was buzzing constantly with notifications. Someone had created a Facebook post titled, "Pray for the Blake Family," detailing Carol's version of events. The post had been shared 40 times within our community. Comments poured in expressing sympathy for Carol and disgust at my alleged greed. That poor woman losing her mother and then being attacked by her own daughter. Some people have no respect for their elders. Money brings out the worst in people. Megan's Instagram was worse. She'd posted a series of photos of May, each with a caption about family betrayal and grief. One showed May's smiling face with the words, "My grandmother deserved better than to have her memory tarnished by greed. Some people will do anything for money." The post had hundreds of likes and dozens of comments supporting Megan, calling me terrible names I couldn't bear to read. Old family friends stopped returning my calls. Aunt Patricia, whom I hadn't spoken to in 5 years, left me a voicemail that dripped with contempt. "I always knew you were selfish, Jennifer, but this is a new low. Your mother sacrificed everything for you, and this is how you repay her. You should be ashamed." Cousins. I barely remembered sent messages ranging from disappointed to outright hostile. Even at work, things changed. Mrs. Henderson called me into her office to discuss the situation. Her tone carefully neutral, but her meaning clear. The library couldn't be associated with family drama and legal disputes that reflected poorly on our professional image. She didn't fire me, but the warning was implicit. Only a handful of people stood by me. Mrs. Chen from next door to May's house called to say she knew the truth, that she'd watched me care for May and knew my character. 2 other elderly women from May's book club reached out with quiet messages of support. But their voices were drowned out by the chorus of condemnation orchestrated by my family. Alone in my apartment that evening, I sat in the dark, scrolling through message after message, each one a small knife cutting into my resolve. Distant relatives I'd met maybe twice in my life felt entitled to judge me, to call me ungrateful and greedy and cruel. Nobody asked for my side of the story. Nobody questioned Carol's narrative. I was being convicted in the court of public opinion, without a trial, without evidence, without a chance to defend myself. I thought about giving up. What was the point of fighting when it cost me everything? When it isolated me so completely that I felt like I was drowning in loneliness? Maybe Carol was right. Maybe I should just accept reality and move on. Then I remembered May's final weeks sitting beside her bed, reading aloud while she drifted in and out of sleep. One afternoon, she'd taken my hand with surprising strength and pulled me close. Her voice was weak but fierce. "Promise me you'll be brave, Jenny. Promise me you'll do what's right, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. That's when character matters most." I'd promised her. And May had never broken a promise to me. I picked up my phone and called Marion. When she answered, my voice was steady for the first time in days. "I'm ready to fight," I said. "Whatever it takes. What do we do next?" There was a pause. Then Marion's voice came back, quiet but determined. "We need to find proof of their intent, evidence that shows this was planned. Does your grandmother's house still have her belongings in it? Papers, documents, anything she might have left behind?" My breath caught. The house. The new owners weren't scheduled to move in for another few weeks. It should. The sale just closed. Nobody's moved in yet. "Then we need to get inside that house," Marion said, "before they think to remove anything incriminating." The next afternoon, I drove past May's house 3 times before I finally pulled into the driveway. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The house looked abandoned already, with that particular emptiness that settles over a place when the life has been drained from it. The garden May had tended so carefully was already showing signs of neglect, weeds creeping between the rose bushes she'd loved. I sat in my car for 5 full minutes, trying to steady my breathing before I finally pulled out the old key I'd kept on my keyring for years. May had given it to me when I turned 16, saying I should always have access to home. I'd never imagined I'd be using it like this, sneaking into what was legally no longer her house, technically trespassing. But Marion had been clear we needed evidence, and we needed it before anyone thought to destroy it. The key slid into the lock smoothly, and I felt a small surge of relief that Carol hadn't bothered to change it yet. The door opened with a familiar creak that made my chest ache with memory. Inside, the house felt wrong. Most of the furniture was gone, leaving pale rectangles on the hardwood floors where pieces had stood for decades. The walls were bare, the curtains stripped away everything that had made this place May's home now erased. But in the living room, May's baby grand piano still stood in its place by the bay window. Of course it did. That piano weighed nearly 1,000 pounds. Moving it would require professional piano movers and careful planning, not something that could be done in the rushed 3 weeks since the sale. I walked toward it slowly, my fingers trailing along its polished black surface. May had taught me to play on this piano, her patient hands guiding mine over the keys, her voice soft as she counted out rhythms. I remembered something then, a detail I hadn't thought about in years. The piano bench wasn't just a seat. It had a hinged lid that lifted up, revealing a storage compartment where May kept sheet music. My hands were trembling as I lifted the cushioned top, and there, just as I remembered, were stacks of yellowed music books. Beethoven sonatas, Chopin nocturnes, simple songs May had played for church services. I started pulling them out, setting them carefully on the floor beside me. And that's when I felt it. The bottom of the bench didn't sit quite flush. There was a slight gap along one edge, almost imperceptible. My pulse quickened as I ran my fingers along the seam, finding a small indentation. I pressed, and a section of the bottom lifted away, revealing a hidden compartment beneath the sheet music. Inside lay 2 items. The first was a small brass key on a simple metal ring with a paper tag attached. In May's careful handwriting it read, First National Bank Safety Deposit Box, 247. The second was a thick envelope, the paper cream-colored and expensive, sealed with red wax that bore the impression of May's old signet ring. Across the front, in that same beloved handwriting, slightly shakier than the tag, but still unmistakably hers, for Jennifer, only open when you're ready to know everything. I held the envelope with both hands, my eyes filling with tears. May had known. She'd known what Carol would do, and she'd left this here for me to find, hidden in the one piece of furniture too heavy to move quickly. It was like receiving a message from beyond the grave, May's voice reaching across death to guide me. Should I open it now? My fingers moved to the wax seal, but something made me hesitate. The envelope felt heavy with importance, with secrets that would change everything once revealed. I wanted to read it in private, somewhere safe where I could process whatever May had written without fear of interruption. I was carefully replacing the false bottom of the piano bench, the envelope and key clutched against my chest when I heard it. The distinct sound of a car door slamming shut close by, right out front. My entire body went rigid with fear. Through the bay window, I could see Carol's silver sedan parked at the curb, and Carol herself standing on the front walk, talking to a man in a business suit, gesturing toward the house. The real estate agent probably doing some final walkthrough or assessment. Panic flooded through me. If Carol found me here, if she realized I'd discovered something, she might destroy whatever other evidence remained. I shoved the sheet music back into the piano bench and lowered the lid as quietly as I could, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the envelope. I could hear voices now, Carol's laugh carrying through the walls, getting closer. The back door. I'd played in this house for years, knew every entrance and exit. I moved through the kitchen on silent feet, clutching the envelope and key against my body like they might somehow escape. My hand was on the back doorknob when I heard the scrape of Carol's key in the front lock, heard the door beginning to open. I twisted the back door handle and slipped outside, easing it closed behind me just as I heard Carol's voice echoing through the empty house. As you can see, the property is in excellent condition. The new owners are getting a real gem. I walked quickly down the alley behind the house, forcing myself not to run, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Only when I was 2 blocks away did I finally stop, leaning against a tree to catch my breath. I looked down at the envelope in my hands, at May's handwriting, at the promise of answers sealed beneath that red wax. May had left me a treasure hunt, a trail of breadcrumbs leading to the truth. And I'd just found the first clue. That night, I sat at my small kitchen table with the envelope in front of me, staring at it for a long time before I finally worked up the courage to break the seal. The wax cracked cleanly, and I pulled out several sheets of May's personal stationery covered in her distinctive flowing script. My hands trembled as I began to read. "My dearest Jenny," the letter began. "If you're reading this, Carol has done exactly what I feared. She's betrayed you. She's taken what I meant for you to have. But don't worry, my darling girl. I've been documenting everything for 40 years. May's letter continued for 3 more pages, detailing financial records she'd kept, bank statements she'd saved, instances of theft dating back to 1989. She'd known about every dollar Carol had taken over the years, had forgiven each betrayal while quietly documenting it. The letter ended with instructions to use the safety deposit key and a final line that made my throat tight. "I love you, Jenny. I always have. Now finish what I started." I spent that night reading and rereading May's words, my emotions swinging between grief and determination. By morning, I'd resolved to visit the bank to see what else May had left for me. But 3 days later, everything changed. I was driving home from work, taking my usual route that passed by May's old street, when I saw the smoke. Thick, dark plumes rising above the roofline, visible from 2 blocks away. My foot hit the accelerator before I'd consciously decided to move. As I rounded the corner onto Maple Street, I could see flames licking from the back of May's house, orange and angry against the darkening sky. My hands shook as I pulled over and dialed 911, my voice high and frantic as I reported the address. The operator told me fire trucks were already en route, that someone else had called it in. I stayed on the line anyway, watching helplessly as smoke billowed from the kitchen windows, unable to look away from the destruction of the place that had been my childhood home. The fire trucks arrived within minutes, sirens wailing. Firefighters moved with practiced efficiency, unrolling hoses, shouting instructions to each other. I stood on the sidewalk across the street, my arms wrapped around myself, watching as they fought to contain the blaze. A small crowd had gathered, neighbors in bathrobes and slippers, murmuring to each other with concerned faces. When the fire chief finally approached me, his face was grim beneath the soot. I'd identified myself as May's granddaughter when I first arrived, and now he gestured for me to follow him away from the crowd. "The fire's contained," he said, "mostly damage to the back storage area and kitchen. Could have been much worse if Mrs. Chen next door hadn't spotted it when she did." He paused, his expression hardening. "But here's the thing, Ms. Blake. This wasn't an accident. My investigators found clear evidence of accelerant gasoline poured in a trail along the back door and into the storage room. Someone set this fire deliberately." The words hit me like a physical blow. Arson. Someone had tried to burn down May's house. "But why?" I whispered, though even as I asked, cold understanding was settling into my bones. The documents, May's records, whatever else she'd left behind that might prove what Carol had done. "That's what we're trying to determine," the fire chief said. "You have any idea who might want to damage this property?" Before I could answer, a soft voice spoke behind me. "Excuse me, dear. I think I might be able to help." I turned to see Mrs. Chen May's next-door neighbor, a tiny woman of 82 with steel-gray hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. She'd been one of May's closest friends and one of the few people who'd reached out to support me after Carol's smear campaign began. "Mrs. Chen," I said, surprised. "You're the one who called 911. She nodded, then turned to the fire chief. "I installed a video doorbell camera last month after we had some break-ins in the neighborhood. It faces the street, but it has a wide angle. I think it might have caught something." She pulled out her phone with hands that trembled slightly. "I already looked at the footage. I think you need to see this." The fire chief, Mrs. Chen, and I huddled around her phone as she pulled up the video. The timestamp read 2:47 a.m. In the grainy night vision footage, I watched a car pull into the alley behind May's house. Even in black and white, the distinctive rounded shape was unmistakable, as was the color that showed as light gray on the screen. Megan's yellow Volkswagen Beetle, the car she'd bought last year and posted about endlessly on Instagram. My stomach dropped as I watched a hooded figure emerge from the driver's side, small and slight in build, definitely female. The figure opened the trunk and pulled out what was clearly a gas can, then disappeared around the back of the house. For 20 long minutes, nothing happened. Then suddenly the orange glow of flames became visible through the camera's view. The hooded figure sprinted back to the car, fumbling with the door before jumping in and speeding away down the alley. "I already emailed a copy to the fire marshal's office," Mrs. Chen said quietly, looking at me with sad, knowing eyes. "I'm sorry, Jennifer, but that's your sister's car." The fire chief took Mrs. Chen's information and thanked her for her cooperation. I stood frozen, unable to process what I'd just seen. Megan. My own sister had tried to burn down May's house, had tried to destroy whatever evidence remained of Carol's crimes. The betrayal felt like it had layers now, each one cutting deeper than the last. Within 24 hours, the news broke. I was at work when my phone buzzed with an alert from the local news app. "Local woman arrested for arson of family property." My hands went numb as I clicked through to read that Megan Blake, age 33, had been taken into custody that morning and charged with first-degree arson. The article mentioned the video evidence and the fact that the property had recently been sold as part of an estate settlement. The comment section was already filling up, and I couldn't stop myself from reading them. The tone had shifted dramatically. People who'd condemned me days ago were now questioning Carol's version of events. "If the sister is willing to commit arson, what else is this family hiding?" one comment read. Another said, "Maybe we should hear Jennifer Blake's side before we judge." Marian called me that afternoon, and I could hear something like satisfaction in her voice despite the grim circumstances. Jennifer, Megan's attorney, is trying to negotiate a plea deal. She's terrified of going to trial. And in her initial statement to police before her lawyer arrived, she said something very interesting. "What?" I asked, my voice barely audible. She told the investigating officer, and I quote, "Mom said there were documents in the house that would ruin us. She told me we had to get rid of them. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. The house was supposed to be empty. I just wanted to help my mom." Marian paused to let that sink in. Jennifer Megan just admitted that Carol directed her to destroy evidence. That's conspiracy obstruction of justice, and it completely undermines their lawsuit against you. I sat down heavily, my legs suddenly unable to hold me. She confessed, "Essentially, yes. And now we have leverage." Marian's tone shifted. "But there's something else. I went to First National Bank this morning with the key you found. I opened your grandmother's safety deposit box. Jennifer, you need to come to my office right away. What May left in that box changes everything." The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday at the county courthouse. Marian had filed an emergency counter-motion challenging Carol's lawsuit and requesting immediate intervention based on the QPRT violation. As we climbed the courthouse steps that morning, I felt my stomach churning with anxiety. This would be the first time I'd face Carol in a formal legal setting, the first time a judge would hear both sides of the story that had torn our family apart. The courtroom was far more crowded than I'd expected. Word had apparently spread through our small community, and the gallery was filled with familiar faces. I recognized people from May's book club volunteers, from the senior center neighbors from Maple Street. They'd come to witness this, to see justice unfold or falter. The weight of their attention made my hands tremble as Marian and I took our seats at the plaintiff's table. Carol arrived 10 minutes late, making an entrance. She wore a designer outfit I'd never seen before, a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, paired with expensive heels and jewelry that caught the light. The house sale money, I realized with a sick feeling. She was literally wearing my inheritance. Her attorney, a sharp-featured man named Richard Hastings with slicked-back hair and an aggressive stance, looked every bit as confident as Carol did. They took their seats across from us, and Carol didn't even glance in my direction. But I noticed something else. The elderly community members who'd come to observe had deliberately chosen sides. Mrs. Chen sat directly behind me, along with 3 other women from May's social circle. Their presence felt like a shield at my back, a silent testament that someone believed me. Judge Patricia Morrison entered, and we all stood. She was a woman in her early 60s with silver hair and a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency. As she reviewed the case files before her, her expression gave nothing away. Carol's attorney spoke first, his voice smooth and practiced. He painted a picture of Jennifer Blake as a calculating manipulator who had spent years poisoning May against her own daughter, who had isolated an elderly woman during her final months, and who now refused to accept the legitimate decisions made by the properly appointed executor of the estate. He called me a gold digger, accused me of elder abuse through isolation, and suggested my grief was performative rather than genuine. I felt my face burning as he spoke, humiliation washing over me in waves. Several people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. Then, as Hastings reached what seemed to be his dramatic conclusion about my supposed greed and manipulation, a voice rang out from behind me. "Your Honor, may I speak?" Everyone turned. Mrs. Chen had risen to her feet, her small frame somehow commanding the room's attention. Judge Morrison looked surprised but intrigued. "This is highly irregular," she said. "You're not a party to this case." "No, Your Honor, but I was May Blake's neighbor and friend for 40 years, Mrs. Chen said, her voice trembling but determined. "And I cannot sit here and listen to lies about Jennifer without speaking the truth." Judge Morrison considered for a moment, then nodded. "Approach the bench and state your name for the record." Mrs. Chen walked forward with careful dignity. "My name is Linda Chen. I lived next door to May Blake from 1985 until her death this year. And I need this court to know something." She turned to look directly at Carol, and there was steel in her gaze. "I watched Jennifer care for her grandmother every single day during May's final months. She cooked meals, managed medications, read to May every night when May's eyes grew too tired. She took time off work, she rearranged her entire life, she was there." Mrs. Chen's voice grew stronger. "And Carol visited twice in 6 months. Both times she asked May for money. Both times May looked sad after she left. May told me more than once that her daughter only showed up when she needed something. Your Honor, Jennifer isn't the one who lacked character in this situation." The courtroom had gone completely silent. Then slowly 3 other elderly women stood up behind Mrs. Chen. One of them was Mrs. Patterson from church, who'd comforted Carol at the funeral. She looked at Carol now with disappointment clear on her face. "May told me the same thing," Mrs. Patterson said quietly. "I'm ashamed I believed the lies." Judge Morrison's expression had shifted from neutral to something harder, more focused. She looked at Marion. "Counsel, I've reviewed your evidence regarding this QPRT document. I've also been made aware of the arson arrest involving the defendant's other daughter. I'm deeply troubled by what I'm seeing here." Carol's face had gone pale. Hastings was shuffling through papers frantically, clearly not prepared for this turn. "I'm issuing a temporary restraining order effective immediately," Judge Morrison continued. "All proceeds from the sale of the property located at 2547 Maple Street are to be frozen. Carol Blake is prohibited from accessing, transferring, or spending any remaining funds. Furthermore, the sale itself is suspended pending a full investigation into the circumstances." She looked directly at Carol, and her voice was cold. "I'm also ordering that the property be secured and that no one, including family members, is to enter or remove anything without court supervision." Carol stood abruptly. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous. I'm the executor. I have legal authority." "You had authority that you appear to have abused." Judge Morrison cut her off. "Sit down, Ms. Blake. I'm scheduling a full evidentiary hearing in 30 days. Both parties will present all relevant documents, witnesses, and evidence at that time. Until then, the status quo is frozen." She banged her gavel once sharply. "I'm very troubled by what I'm hearing about this case. Very troubled indeed. Court is adjourned." As people began filing out, I sat stunned, hardly able to believe what had just happened. Marian squeezed my shoulder. "First victory," she whispered. "Small, but significant." Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered, drawn by the arson story, and now interested in the larger family drama. A young woman with a microphone pushed through the small crowd toward me. "Ms. Blake. Ms. Blake, can you comment on today's ruling?" She thrust the microphone near my face. "Why would your grandmother create such a complicated legal trap? What was she really protecting?" I looked at the reporter, then at Marian, who gave me a small nod of permission. I thought about May's letter, about 40 years of documentation, about a woman who'd loved deeply, but refused to enable destruction. "My grandmother," I said slowly, choosing each word with care, "was protecting the truth. She was protecting her legacy from people who valued money more than integrity. And she was protecting me from having to fight this battle alone." I met the camera directly. May Blake spent her whole life helping people. She deserved better than to have her estate stolen by people she trusted. And I'm going to make sure her real wishes are honored no matter what it costs me. The reporter's eyes lit up. "So you're saying your mother stole your inheritance?" Marian stepped forward smoothly, ending the interview. "No further questions at this time." She guided me toward her car, but I caught a glimpse of Carol standing by the courthouse steps. Her expensive outfit somehow looking cheaper, now her face a mask of rage and fear, as she watched the cameras turn away from her and toward me. The day after the hearing, Marian and I drove to First National Bank together. I carried the brass key May had hidden under the piano bench, my fingers wrapped so tightly around it that the metal edges dug into my palm. The bank manager, a professional woman named Susan, who remembered May from her years as a customer, led us to the vault room with its rows of numbered boxes lining the walls. She used her master key alongside mine and safety deposit box. 247 slid out with a metallic whisper. Inside the box held more than I'd imagined. 3 leather-bound journals, their covers worn soft with age and handling, lay stacked carefully on top of a thick manila folder bulging with papers. Beneath those was another sealed envelope, this one addressed simply, "Jennifer," in May's familiar script. Marian and I carried everything to a private viewing room the bank provided, and I sat staring at the journals for a long moment before I could bring myself to touch them. The first journal was dated 1985 to 1995, the years covering my early childhood. I opened it carefully, the leather creaking slightly, and began to read. May's handwriting in the early entries was strong and flowing, each word formed with care. The entries weren't daily diary thoughts, but rather specific incidents recorded with dates, times, and details. The first few pages described normal family events, birthdays, and holidays, but then came an entry from March 1989 that made my breath catch. "Discovered today that $15,000 is missing from my savings account," May had written. "Bank showed me withdrawal slips with my signature, but I never signed them. I knew immediately it was Carol. When I confronted her, she denied it for 2 hours, then finally broke down crying. She forged my signature. She took the money to pay gambling debts she'd hidden from Ray. She begged my forgiveness, promised it would never happen again." The entry continued. "I forgave her because she's my daughter and I love her. But I also opened a separate account she doesn't know about. I need to protect myself. Was I a fool to forgive her? Time will tell." Marian and I spent the next 3 hours going through the journals systematically, and a devastating pattern emerged. In 1997, May recorded that $8,000 had vanished, supposedly for a photography business Carol wanted to start. The business never materialized. In 2003, $22,000 was taken from May's retirement fund through forged authorization forms. Carol claimed it was for Megan's college, but Megan had attended community college on a full scholarship. In 2015, May documented discovering a series of forged checks, totaling $30,000, cashed over a 6-month period. Each time Carol had cried, apologized, promised reform. Each time, May had forgiven her. But with each incident, May's entries grew more reflective, more sad, showing a woman who loved her daughter, but was slowly realizing that love alone couldn't change her. The second journal covered 2010 to 2020, and here May's awareness sharpened. An entry from 2018 particularly struck me. Carol asked to borrow $5,000 today. I said no for the first time ever. She became angry, said I was cruel, that I didn't care about my own family. Then she said something that hurt deeply. You give everything to Jennifer anyway. She's not even your real granddaughter. I realized then that Carol sees love as a transaction, as something finite that must be divided. She doesn't understand that love multiplies when it's genuine. By 2020, May's entries had taken on a tone of deliberate planning. I love my daughter, but I'm not blind anymore, she wrote in January of that year. I've watched her for 35 years, always hoping she'd change, always believing the next time would be different. But people show you who they are through patterns, not promises. I must protect what I've built, not for myself, I'll be gone soon enough, but for Jenny and for the community I want to help. Carol would squander it all. I know that now. The third journal was the hardest to read. It covered only the last 4 years of May's life, and the handwriting grew progressively shakier as her health declined. But the entries about me made tears stream down my face. May wrote about our evenings together, about teaching me her pie recipe, about conversations we'd had about books and life and what mattered. In an entry from 2 months before her death, she'd written words that broke my heart. Jenny isn't my blood granddaughter. Sarah adopted her before dying, and I took her in out of love, not obligation. But she's my heart in a way Carol never was. She's the daughter I wish I'd raised. She cares for people, not things. She gives without counting the cost. She deserves everything Carol has squandered over the years, everything Carol would waste given the chance. I couldn't read anymore. I put my head down on the table and sobbed, Marion's hand gentle on my shoulder. May had known. She'd known about every betrayal, had documented it all with painful clarity, and she'd still loved Carol while preparing to protect me from her. The grief of it, the sad wisdom of a mother who'd watched her daughter choose greed over integrity year after year, was overwhelming. Marion let me cry for several minutes before she gently pulled the journals away and opened the manila folder. Inside were bank statements, copies of forged checks, withdrawal slips, letters from Carol asking for money, even photographs of documents. May had kept everything, building an irrefutable case spanning 40 years. Your grandmother wanted you to understand, Marion said softly. This isn't about revenge. This was never about revenge. It's about justice, about protecting what she built, and about revealing the truth of who people really are. I wiped my eyes and nodded, unable to speak. Then Marion picked up the final sealed envelope and carefully broke the wax seal. Inside was a single page, and May's handwriting here was shakier than I'd ever seen it, the letters wavering as though written by a hand that could barely hold the pen. Marion began reading aloud. Jennifer. By now you know about Carol's history. You understand why I had to protect you and my legacy from her. But there's one more thing you don't know, one more person who can help you. You need to find Michael Alvarez. He was my accountant and my friend for 40 years. He witnessed many of Carol's thefts. He kept records I asked him to keep. He has proof of everything, documented proof that will stand up in any court. Find him. He has been waiting to help you. His phone number is... The sentence ended there, trailing off into an illegible scrawl as though May's strength had finally given out. The rest of the page was blank. I looked at Marion, my heart sinking. Who is Michael Alvarez? I asked. I've never heard that name. Marion was already pulling out her phone. I have. May mentioned him once in passing years ago. He was her accountant back in the 80s and 90s. If he kept records like she says, and if we can find him, he's the witness we need. She looked up at me, and there was something like hope in her eyes. Jennifer, we're going to find this man. And when we do, we'll have everything we need to prove your case beyond any doubt." Marian spent the rest of that afternoon searching for Michael Alvarez. She started with the accountancy board records, then moved to property tax databases, and finally found what she was looking for. A phone number listed under an M, Alvarez, in a town 30 miles north of us. I stared at the number she'd written down, my hand hovering over my phone for several minutes before I finally worked up the courage to dial. The phone rang 3 times before a man's voice answered, warm and slightly accented. "Hello. Is this Michael Alvarez?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. There was a pause, then a soft exhalation that sounded almost like relief. "Jennifer Blake. I've been waiting for your call. Your grandmother told me you'd find this eventually, though I admit I was beginning to wonder if perhaps the trail had gone cold." The fact that he knew my name before I'd said it sent a shiver through me. "You knew May. You knew my grandmother." "I knew her for 40 years, Michael said gently. "She was the most important person in my life, and I owe her everything. She told me that if anything happened to her, if Carol did what May feared she might, you would eventually find my name and number. She made me promise I'd help you when the time came, so here I am, ready to fulfill that promise." We agreed to meet the following day at a small cafe in his town, a place he said was quiet and private enough for the conversation we needed to have. I barely slept that night, my mind spinning with questions about who this man was and what he knew about May's life that I didn't. When I walked into the Bluebird Cafe the next morning, Marian beside me, I spotted him immediately. Michael Alvarez was a distinguished-looking man of 68, with silver hair and kind brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a simple gray cardigan over a button-down shirt, and on the table before him sat a worn leather satchel that looked like it had seen decades of use. He stood as we approached, and something in his expression, a mixture of sadness and determination, told me this meeting would change everything. "Jennifer," he said, shaking my hand with both of his. "You look so much like Sarah. Your mother, I mean. May's daughter who adopted you. I met her a few times before she passed. She would be proud of you." He gestured for us to sit, and once Marian had introduced herself formally as my attorney, Michael opened his satchel with careful, deliberate movements. "I need you to understand something first," he began. "I was May's accountant beginning in 1984, but I was more than that. I was her friend, her confidant, and in many ways the son she wished she'd had. She helped me when I was at my lowest point, gave me work when no one else would trusted me when I had nothing. I owed her everything, and when she asked me to help her document the truth about Carol, I agreed without hesitation." He pulled out 5 spiral-bound notebooks, their covers worn and pages yellowed with age. "These span from 1985 to 2024. May asked me to keep contemporaneous records of every financial irregularity, every suspicious transaction, every incident involving Carol that concerned her. I didn't do this secretly or through surveillance. May was present for most of these recordings. She would tell me what happened, show me the bank statements or forged documents, and I would write it all down with dates, amounts, and specific details. Then May would sign each entry to confirm its accuracy." I opened the first notebook with trembling hands. The entries were meticulous, written in neat block letters, each one dated and detailed. March 15, 1989. May reported discovering unauthorized withdrawal of $15,000 from savings account. Provided copies of withdrawal slips showing forged signature. Carol admitted to forgery when confronted. May chose to forgive rather than press charges. Below this entry in May's unmistakable handwriting was her signature and the words, "Confirmed accurate, May be." Page after page told the same story. Every theft May had described in her journals was documented here in even greater detail with supporting evidence attached. Michael had photocopied the forged checks, the bank statements, even photographs of documents where Carol's handwriting could be compared side by side with May's authentic signature. The differences were obvious once you knew to look for them. Carol's letters slightly more angular, her capital M distinctly different from May's flowing script. "This is 40 years of documentation," Michael said quietly, as Marion and I paged through the notebooks in stunned silence. "Every incident May recorded in her personal journals I recorded in mine with her full knowledge and consent. These are proper business records kept contemporaneously by her accountant in the normal course of business. They're completely admissible in court." Marion looked up at him, and I saw tears in her eyes. "Mr. Alvarez, do you understand what this means? This isn't just supporting evidence. This is a complete documented pattern spanning 4 decades, signed and confirmed by the victim herself. This is ironclad." "I know," Michael said simply. "That's why May asked me to keep them. She knew that someday the truth would need to be proven beyond any doubt." He pulled out another folder from his satchel. "I also have the original documents from when we set up the QPRT in 2004. I was the one who suggested it to May, actually. She came to me concerned about protecting her house for Jennifer, and I explained how a qualified personal residence trust could serve that purpose, while also providing estate tax benefits." He spread the documents across the table. "May wasn't vindictive, Jennifer. You need to understand that. She hoped every single day that Carol would change, that her daughter would choose integrity over greed. She told me once about 5 years ago, 'Michael, I'm setting a test. If Carol respects my wishes and Jennifer's rights, then everyone benefits and the family stays intact. If Carol doesn't, if she tries to steal what I've left for Jennifer, then at least Jennifer will be protected and the truth will finally be revealed.' She saw it as one last chance to reveal Carol's true character, not to punish, but to illuminate." I found my voice finally, though it came out as barely a whisper. She loved Carol. Even knowing what she was, May loved her. "Of course she did," Michael said gently. "May had the biggest heart of anyone I've ever known. But she also had wisdom. She understood that loving someone doesn't mean enabling their worst behavior. It means setting boundaries, protecting yourself and others, and sometimes letting them face the consequences of their choices." Marion was already making notes, her legal mind clearly racing through the implications. "Mr. Alvarez, would you be willing to testify in court to present these records and explain their provenance?" "I've been waiting 40 years to do exactly that," Michael said. "May made me promise. She said, 'If Carol does what I fear, if she tries to cheat Jennifer, you must stand up and tell the truth. You must help my Jenny fight.' I intend to keep that promise." We spent another hour going through the notebooks, Michael explaining the context of various entries, showing us how each piece of evidence connected to the larger pattern. By the time we finished, I felt like I'd been given a weapon I hadn't known existed, a shield May had spent decades forging to protect me. As we were gathering everything to leave, preparing to return to Marion's office to plan our strategy, Michael reached out and touched my arm gently. "There's one more thing," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that made both Marion and me pause. "May left something else. A video message. She recorded it 6 weeks before she died in my office with my help. It's 30 minutes long, and in it she speaks directly to you, to Carol, to Ray, to Megan. She addresses each of you by name." He looked at me intently. "But she made me promise something. She said you could only see it after you learned the whole truth about your family, after you understood the full scope of what Carol had done over the years. She didn't want you to see it while you still had illusions. She wanted you to understand the context first." My heart was pounding. "A video, May left me a video." "She left all of you a video," Michael corrected gently. "One final message explaining everything in her own words. But Jennifer, you need to be ready for it. What she says, the truths she reveals, they'll change how you see your family forever. There's no going back once you watch it." I looked at Marion, then back at Michael. "I'm ready. I think I've been ready since the moment I found out they sold her house behind my back." Michael nodded slowly. "Then I'll bring it to you. Soon. When the time is right." Back at Marion's office, we spread Michael's notebooks across the conference table, like pieces of an intricate puzzle finally coming together. Michael settled into a chair, his worn leather satchel still resting beside him, and I noticed him reach inside once more with a hesitant expression. "There's something else you need to know," he said quietly, pulling out a thin folder marked with a date from 2010. "May asked me to hold on to this, and to show it to you only after you understood the full scope of Carol's behavior. She wanted you to have context before you learned this particular truth." Marian took the folder and opened it carefully. Her expression shifted as she read the top document, something flickering across her face that might have been surprise or perhaps understanding. She looked at me, then at Michael, then back at the paper. "Jennifer," she said gently, "this is a DNA test. From 2010. It shows that you are not May's biological granddaughter." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the room tilt slightly, my hands gripping the edge of the table to steady myself. "What? That's impossible. Sarah was May's daughter, and Sarah was my mother." "Sarah was May's daughter," Michael confirmed, his voice impossibly kind. "But Sarah adopted you when you were an infant. May knew this from the very beginning. She never told you because she didn't think it mattered, because to her love was never about biology." I couldn't breathe properly. Everything I'd believed about my identity, about my place in the world, suddenly felt uncertain and fragile. "Carol knows about this." "Carol found out years ago," Michael said. "May told me that Carol discovered the adoption papers while going through old files, probably looking for something she could use or sell. After that, whenever Carol wanted to hurt May during their arguments, she would throw it in her face. 'She's not even your real granddaughter,' Carol would say. 'You're choosing her over your real family.' It was one of Carol's cruelest weapons. The pain of that cut deep. Not just that I wasn't biologically connected to May, but that Carol had known and had used it to wound the woman who'd loved us both. Marian was watching me with concern, but Michael reached into his satchel one more time and produced an envelope with my name written across it in May's unmistakable script. "May left this for you," he said, placing it in my trembling hands. "She marked it open when you know about the DNA. She wanted you to hear this truth from her in her own words after you understood everything else." With shaking fingers, I broke the seal and pulled out 2 pages of May's stationery, the paper slightly wrinkled as though it had been held by hands that trembled while writing. May's handwriting here was shakier than in her earlier letters, the letters formed with obvious effort, but the message was unmistakably clear. "My dearest Jennifer," I read aloud, my voice breaking. "If Michael has given you this letter, then you now know that you are not my biological granddaughter. I need you to understand how you came to be mine. Sarah, my beloved daughter, adopted you when you were 3 months old. Your birth mother was very young in a terrible situation, and she made the brave choice to give you to someone who could provide the life she couldn't. Sarah fell in love with you instantly. She brought you home, and you became ours, as much a part of this family as if you'd been born into it. Then, when you were 2 years old, Sarah died in that car accident, and my world shattered. But when I looked at you, this tiny child who'd lost the only mother you'd known, I didn't hesitate for even a moment. You were mine to love and protect, and I was honored to raise you." I had to stop reading as tears blurred my vision. Marian quietly handed me a tissue, and I wiped my eyes before continuing. "Jennifer, you are not my granddaughter by blood. You are my granddaughter by choice, and that is so much stronger than any DNA could ever be. I watched you grow from a grieving toddler into a woman of integrity, kindness, and courage. I watched you care for others without counting the cost. I watched you choose compassion over convenience time and time again. Carol is my biological daughter, but you are my true heir. Not because of what you are or where you came from, but because of who you are and who you've chosen to become. Blood doesn't make family, Jennifer. Love makes family. Choice makes family. And I chose you every single day, just as you chose to love me back." The letter continued. "I'm leaving you my estate, not because you're entitled to it by birth, but because you've earned it through character. I'm trusting you with my legacy, because I know you'll use it to help others, to build community, to carry forward the values I tried to live by. Carol would spend it on herself. You'll spend it on making the world a little bit kinder. That's why you're my heir. That's why everything I built is yours. Never doubt that you deserved this, Jennifer. Never let anyone tell you that love can only count when it's backed by shared genetics. You are mine and I am yours, and that truth is unshakable. By the time I finished reading, I was openly crying. Michael's eyes were wet too, and even Marian had to look away for a moment to compose herself. The revelation that I wasn't biologically May's had shaken me. But this letter, these words had somehow made everything clearer and more meaningful than before. She chose me, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Knowing I wasn't her blood, knowing Carol was, she still chose me. Because family isn't about DNA, Michael said softly. It's about who shows up, who cares, who loves without conditions. May understood that better than anyone I've ever known. She adopted Carol in the 1960s, hoping to give a child a better life. She took you in when Sarah died, hoping to give you love and stability. She gave both of you every opportunity to be worthy of that love. Only one of you chose to honor it. I looked down at the letter again, at May's shaky handwriting forming words of such profound love and acceptance. Everything suddenly made sense. The house, the QPRT, the careful documentation, the legal protections. None of it was about bloodline or obligation. It was about May consciously choosing to leave her legacy to the person who embodied her values regardless of genetics. It was about character over kinship, integrity over inheritance by birth. I wiped my eyes and looked at Marian and Michael with new resolve. My grandmother gave me more than an inheritance. She gave me a mission. She trusted me with her legacy because she believed I would use it the right way to help people the way she always did. And I'm not going to let Carol destroy that. I'm not going to let anyone think May was senile or easily manipulated. Let's make sure everyone knows exactly who Carol really is and what she's done. Marian nodded, respect clear in her expression. We have everything we need now. Michael's records, May's journals, the QPRT documents, the evidence of the arson. We can... Her phone rang, cutting through the moment. She glanced at the screen and frowned. It's my paralegal, excuse me. She answered, listened for a moment, then her expression darkened. Turn on the TV, channel 7, now. Michael found the remote and switched on the television mounted on Marian's office wall. The local evening news was on, and there, sitting in the studio looking perfectly composed in another expensive outfit, was Carol. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, Estate battle mother claims daughter fabricated evidence. The interviewer, a sympathetic-looking woman, was nodding along as Carol spoke, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. My mother was 86 years old and in declining health. Jennifer took advantage of that, isolated her from the rest of the family, and clearly influenced her to make legal arrangements that didn't reflect Mom's true wishes. This QPRT document they're claiming is valid. My mother would never have created something so complicated and vindictive. It had to have been done when she wasn't thinking clearly. Or worse, Jennifer fabricated it entirely with help from this attorney who's trying to make money off our family tragedy. My mouth fell open in shock. Marian's face had gone stone cold. We're going to destroy her, Marian said quietly, her voice like steel. Michael, how soon can you be ready to testify? We watched in stunned silence as Carol continued her performance on the television screen. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her voice catching as she described May's supposed cognitive decline, pulling out what appeared to be a medical document. This is from her doctor showing concerns about her mental state, Carol said, holding it up to the camera. The interviewer made sympathetic noises, never questioning the document's authenticity or context. By the time the segment ended with Carol's tearful plea for privacy during this difficult time, I felt physically ill. The interview aired at 6 p.m. By 9 o'clock, it had been shared across every local social media platform. By midnight, the story had been picked up by regional news outlets. I made the mistake of reading the comments online where strangers who knew nothing about me or May condemned me with absolute certainty. Elder abuse is so common and so disgusting. That poor mother being attacked by her own daughter. These gold diggers will do anything for money. The words blurred together into a chorus of judgment and hatred. The next morning, I discovered just how completely Carol's narrative had taken hold. I left my apartment to find my next-door neighbor Tom, who usually waved cheerfully, suddenly very interested in checking his mailbox, while studiously avoiding eye contact with me. At the grocery store, conversations stopped when I walked down aisles. I felt eyes following me, heard whispers that cut off abruptly when I turned around. When I arrived at work, Mrs. Henderson was waiting for me in her office, her expression carefully neutral in a way that meant nothing good. She closed the door and asked me to sit, her tone professional but distant. "Jennifer, we need to discuss the situation," she began, folding her hands on her desk. "The library board has expressed concerns about the negative publicity surrounding your family's legal dispute. We've had patrons calling asking questions, and frankly, the accusations being made are troubling." "They're lies," I said, my voice tight. "Everything Carol is saying is a lie. I have evidence, I have witnesses." Mrs. Henderson held up a hand. "I'm not here to judge the merits of your case, but the library is a public institution. We can't be associated with controversy that reflects poorly on our professional image. I'm not terminating you, but I am strongly suggesting you take a leave of absence until this matter is resolved. Paid, of course, but we need some distance from this situation." I left her office feeling like I'd been slapped. By lunch, my phone was buzzing with text messages, each one another small wound. Former coworkers. "Hey, saw the news. Hope you're okay." Translation. "I believe what I saw. Friends from college. I don't want to take sides in a family matter." Translation. "I think you might be guilty. Even people from May's book club, people who should have known better. Maybe it would be best if you didn't come to the senior center for a while. There's been some talk and we want to avoid conflict." The worst message came from Ray. A short, impersonal email that read, "Jennifer, please just drop this. Whatever you think you're accomplishing, you're only tearing the family apart. Mom is devastated. Megan is facing criminal charges. Can't you see the damage you're doing? Let it go. Please." Only Marion Michael and Mrs. Chen remained steadfast. Mrs. Chen called to say she'd tried to correct people at church, but nobody wanted to listen. They'd rather believe the crying woman on TV than an old lady telling uncomfortable truths, she said bitterly. That evening alone in my apartment, I felt the full weight of isolation crush down on me. I sat on my couch in the dark, scrolling through message after message of judgment and rejection, and for the first time since this began, I wondered if I was making a terrible mistake. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe the house wasn't worth losing my job, my community, my father's respect. Maybe May had been confused in her final months, influenced by medications or fear or loneliness. Maybe I was clinging to promises that hadn't been as clear as I remembered them. I pulled out my phone and looked at photos of May, her smiling in her garden, her teaching me to make pie crust, her sleeping peacefully in her favorite chair. The memories of our evenings together flooded back, reading aloud while she drifted in and out of consciousness, holding her hand during doctor's appointments, helping her to the bathroom at 3 a.m. Had I imagined the clarity in her eyes when she'd talked about her plans for the house? Had I projected meaning onto promises she'd made casually, without real intent? The self-doubt spiraled deeper. I was destroying my life over a house and money. I was dragging my family through public humiliation. I was causing Megan to face criminal charges. Maybe Carol was right. Maybe I was the villain in this story. Then I saw May's letter on my coffee table, the one Michael had given me just hours ago. With shaking hands, I picked it up and read it again. "Jennifer, you are not my granddaughter by blood. You are my granddaughter by choice, and that is so much stronger than any DNA. I watched you grow into a woman of integrity, kindness, and courage. Carol is my biological daughter, but you are my true heir. Not because of what you are, but because of who you are." Those words written in May's own shaking hand cut through the fog of doubt. May had known exactly what she was doing. She'd planned for years, documented everything, meticulously set up legal protections specifically because she anticipated Carol would do this. May had chosen me not because I was manipulative or greedy, but because she believed in my character. And she'd set up this test knowing it would be hard, knowing Carol would fight back with lies and tears and public manipulation. Something shifted inside me, doubt hardening into determination. May had trusted me with her legacy because she knew I had the strength to fight for what was right, even when it cost me everything. Especially when it cost me everything. That's what she'd said in those final weeks. "Promise me you'll be brave, Jenny. Promise me you'll do what's right, even when it's hard." I had promised, and May had never broken a promise to me. I picked up my phone and called Marion, not caring that it was nearly 10 at night. "Marion," I said when she answered my voice, steady for the first time in days. "No more defensive strategy. I'm done letting Carol control the narrative. It's time to go on offense. It's time to show everyone exactly who she really is and what she's done for 40 years. There was a pause, then Marion's voice came back with unmistakable satisfaction. "Good. I was hoping you'd say that. Because I just received a call from the district attorney's office about an hour ago. They've been reviewing the evidence we submitted regarding Carol's forgeries and Megan's arson. They want to meet with us tomorrow morning. Jennifer, this is becoming a criminal matter. Carol isn't just facing a civil lawsuit anymore. She's looking at potential felony charges." My breath caught. Felony charges: elder financial abuse forgery conspiracy to commit arson fraud, Marion listed. The DA sees a pattern here that goes beyond a simple family dispute. Michael's documentation, May's journals, the forged signatures on those withdrawal slips. It's not just civil wrongdoing. It's criminal fraud spanning decades. And with Megan already charged with arson and implicating Carol in her statement, the prosecution has everything they need. I sat in the darkness of my apartment phone pressed to my ear and felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: hope. Not just hope for winning, but hope that the truth would finally matter more than Carol's tears, that justice might actually prevail over manipulation. "What do we do next?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., we meet with the DA. And Jennifer," Marion's voice softened slightly, "your grandmother knew this would be hard. She knew Carol would fight dirty, but she also knew you were strong enough to see it through. Don't let her down now!" "I won't," I promised. And this time I meant it with every fiber of my being. The meeting with the district attorney went better than I'd dared hope. She was a sharp woman in her 40s named Rebecca Torres, who listened to Marion's presentation of evidence with focused intensity, occasionally making notes but mostly absorbing every detail. When we left her office 2 hours later, she'd made it clear that formal charges against Carol were likely within the next few weeks. But first we had the evidentiary hearing to get through. The courtroom was packed when we arrived that Tuesday morning. I'd expected a handful of observers, maybe a reporter or two, but instead found the gallery filled to capacity. People from May's senior center neighbors from Maple Street, members of her book club, even some faces I didn't recognize, but who'd apparently followed the case through the news coverage. Carol arrived minutes after us, flanked by her attorney, Richard Hastings, and I noticed her confident stride faltered slightly when she saw the crowd. She'd probably expected sympathy, but the faces looking back at her were largely stern and skeptical. Judge Morrison called the court to order and outlined the purpose of the hearing to determine whether the QPRT was valid, whether May had been competent when creating it, and whether Carol had violated its terms. Hastings rose immediately, launching into an aggressive opening statement that painted May as a confused elderly woman susceptible to manipulation, someone whose mental faculties had deteriorated significantly in her final years. "Your Honor," Hastings said with practiced gravity, "we will show that May Blake was not of sound mind when these suspicious legal documents were created. We will demonstrate that she was unduly influenced by her granddaughter who isolated her from her real family and poisoned her against her own daughter. But Marian was ready. Her first witness was Dr. Patricia Henderson May's primary care physician for the past 15 years. Dr. Henderson took the stand with calm professional demeanor and testified under oath that May had been remarkably sharp mentally until her final week of life. May Blake was one of the most mentally acute patients I've ever treated, Dr. Henderson stated firmly. She managed her own medications, kept meticulous health records, asked intelligent questions about her treatment options. When I saw her 3 weeks before her death, she was discussing books she'd read and giving me gardening advice. There was no cognitive impairment whatsoever. Hastings tried to introduce the doctor's note Carol had shown on television, but Dr. Henderson identified it immediately as documentation from a routine appointment 5 years prior, where May had complained of mild cold symptoms. "There's nothing in that note suggesting dementia or confusion," she said flatly. "It's been taken completely out of context." Marian called witness after witness. The bank manager who'd helped May set up her safety deposit box testified that May had been clear and specific about her instructions, showing no signs of confusion. Mrs. Chen described May's meticulous planning, her sharp memory, her deliberate choices about who to trust. Another neighbor recalled May discussing the QPRT just months before her death, explaining her reasons with perfect clarity. Then it was my turn to take the stand. My hands were shaking as I was sworn in, but I focused on Marian's calm face and tried to steady my breathing. Hastings approached me with predatory confidence, clearly expecting to rattle me. "Ms. Blake, isn't it true that you deliberately isolated your grandmother from her daughter, your mother?" he began. "No," I said clearly. "That's not true." "Isn't it true that you prevented Carol from visiting May during her final months?" "No. Carol was welcome any time. She chose not to come." I looked directly at Carol as I said it, and she looked away. Hastings pressed harder, his questions becoming more accusatory, implying I'd manipulated May for financial gain. But I stayed calm, answering each question with simple facts. I described the reality of May's final months managing her medications 3 times daily because Carol had moved across town and was never available. Driving May to doctor appointments every week because Carol was always too busy. Reading to May each evening because it brought her comfort, and Carol hadn't visited in weeks. Shopping for her groceries, helping her bathe, sitting with her through frightening nights when she struggled to breathe. May's clarity never wavered. I said, my voice steady, despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. Even days before she died, she was making jokes, giving me advice, talking about her plans for the community she wanted to help. She knew exactly what she was doing when she set up the QPRT. She told me so herself. When I stepped down, I caught Marian's small nod of approval. Then she called Michael Alvarez. Michael carried his 5 notebooks to the witness stand with the same careful dignity I'd seen at the cafe. After being sworn in, he explained his relationship to May, his 40 years as her accountant and friend, and the contemporaneous records he'd kept at her request. "These are business records kept in the normal course of my professional duties," Michael explained, opening the first notebook. "Mrs. Blake would inform me of financial irregularities, provide supporting documentation, and I would record the details with dates and amounts. She then confirmed each entry with her signature." Hastings objected immediately. "Your Honor, this is hearsay and prejudicial." But Judge Morrison overruled him. "These are contemporaneous business records with documented authentication. I'll allow it. Continue, Mr. Alvarez." For the next 90 minutes, Michael walked through the notebooks methodically. March 1989, $15,000 stolen through forged signatures. June 1997, $8,000 for a non-existent business. September 2003, $22,000 from retirement accounts. Each entry was backed by copies of forged checks, bank statements, even photographs comparing handwriting. The pattern was undeniable and devastating. The courtroom had fallen completely silent except for Michael's calm voice reading May's confirmed notes. I watched Carol's face drain of color as incident after incident was laid bare before the judge and the packed gallery. Her attorney shifted uncomfortably, occasionally glancing at his client as if seeing her clearly for the first time. When Michael read the final entries from 2024 describing May's deliberate planning and her sad acceptance that Carol would never change, I heard someone in the gallery crying softly. Even Judge Morrison's expression had hardened into something cold and focused. Hastings tried to cross-examine, suggesting the notebooks were fabricated, or that May's signatures were forged, but Michael calmly produced original bank records that corroborated every entry. The attorney's questions grew weaker, more desperate, until finally he sat down with nothing left to argue. Judge Morrison looked at the attorneys, then at Carol, then at the packed courtroom. Her expression was grave. "I'll issue my ruling tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., she said. "But I want to say something on the record right now." She paused, her gaze moving between Carol and me. "I've presided over estate disputes for 23 years. I've seen families torn apart by greed, watched people fight over assets with no regard for the deceased's wishes. But this case troubles me deeply. What I've heard today isn't just a disagreement about inheritance. It's a documented pattern of exploitation spanning 4 decades, targeting a woman who repeatedly chose forgiveness over prosecution." Her voice hardened. "That troubles me profoundly. Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning." The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the silent courtroom. As people began filing out, I felt Marion's hand on my shoulder, felt the weight of 40 years of truth finally being heard, finally being believed. Tomorrow would bring the judge's decision. But today, for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like May's voice had finally been louder than Carol's lies. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Michael reading from those notebooks heard. Carol's attorney's weak objections felt the weight of the judge's troubled expression. Tomorrow would bring the ruling, and though Marion seemed confident, I was terrified of hoping too much only to have it crushed. At 11:30, I was sitting on my couch in the dark, too wired to sleep, when I heard a soft knock at my door. My first thought was that it was Marion with some last-minute legal development. But when I checked the peephole, I saw Ray standing in the hallway, looking smaller and older than I'd ever seen him. His shoulders were hunched, his face haggard in the dim light, and he seemed to have aged a decade in the months since May's funeral. I opened the door slowly. We hadn't been alone together since this whole nightmare began. Every interaction had been filtered through Carol or conducted in tense public settings. Now here he was on my doorstep at nearly midnight, his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, his eyes unable to meet mine. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "I need to tell you something before tomorrow, before the judge rules. You need to understand why I did what I did." I stepped aside wordlessly, and he entered my small apartment like a man walking to his own execution. He sat heavily at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd read May's letters, where I'd cried over her journals. His hands trembled as he folded them on the surface before him. "I'm not here to make excuses," he began, still not meeting my eyes. "What I did was wrong. Going along with Carol, signing those papers, staying silent while she lied about you. It was all wrong and I knew it. But I need you to understand why I was such a coward. I need you to know what Carol had over me." I sat across from him, my arms crossed defensively, waiting. Part of me wanted to throw him out, to tell him it was too late for explanations. But another part, the part that remembered him teaching me to ride a bike, remembered his quiet presence at school events when Carol was always too busy, that part needed to hear this. "It happened in 1989, Ray said quietly. "You were just a baby, so you wouldn't remember. I'd been drinking way too much at a work party. I knew I shouldn't drive, but I did it anyway. Stupid, arrogant thinking I was fine when I absolutely wasn't." His voice broke slightly. "I ran a red light and hit another car. The driver, a woman named Sandra Chen, she was badly hurt. Broken ribs, concussion injuries that took months to heal." I felt my stomach drop. Mrs. Chen, our neighbor who'd stood by me through all of this, was related to the woman my father had hit. May was in the car with me that night, Ray continued. She'd been visiting and I'd insisted on driving her home despite her protests. When the accident happened, I panicked. All I could think about was going to jail, losing my job, losing everything. I actually considered running, just driving away and leaving the scene. He finally looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed and full of shame. But May grabbed my arm and said, "Ray, we stay. We face what you've done. Running makes you a criminal. Staying makes you a man who made a terrible mistake." So we stayed. I sat frozen, processing this revelation about a man I'd thought I knew. "May hired me an attorney with her own money," Ray said. "She paid Sandra Chen's medical bills, every single penny out of her savings. $15,000. She never told anyone because she didn't want people to know how badly I'd screwed up. She protected me, stood by me through the court proceedings, made me promise I'd get sober and never drive drunk again. And I kept that promise, Jennifer. I've been sober for 35 years because of her." "The $15,000? I said slowly, understanding dawning. "That's the money Carol claimed she stole in 1989. "Carol didn't steal it," Ray confirmed. "May spent it protecting me. But Carol found out about the accident years later, going through old papers the way she always did, looking for anything valuable or useful. And when this whole thing started, when I hesitated about signing the papers to sell the house, Carol threatened me." His voice grew bitter. "She said if I didn't cooperate, she'd tell you and Megan about the accident, but she'd frame it like it happened recently, like I was still a danger, still drinking. She said she'd destroy my relationship with you girls, make you afraid of me, turn you against me completely." I felt a wave of nausea. Carol had used my father's past mistake, May's generosity in covering for him, as a weapon to force his compliance in stealing from me. "I was weak," Ray said, tears now streaming freely down his face. "I was so afraid of losing you, of having you look at me with disgust or fear. I let Carol manipulate me into betraying you and betraying May's memory. I signed those papers. I stood by silently while Carol lied. I even sent you that email telling you to drop the case." He covered his face with his hands. "I was a coward, Jennifer. May forgave me once for nearly destroying someone's life. I don't deserve forgiveness again, but I needed you to understand. I never wanted to hurt you. I just didn't have the courage to stand up to Carol." I sat in silence for a long moment, my emotions a tangled mess of anger, pity, and reluctant understanding. Ray had made terrible choices both 35 years ago and in the past few months. But Carol had weaponized his guilt, had turned May's kindness into leverage for her own schemes. "Does Mrs. Chen know," I asked quietly, "that you're the one who hit her relative?" Ray nodded miserably. "Sandra Chen is her cousin. Linda knows everything. May told her years ago, asked her to forgive me. And she did because May asked her to. That's the kind of woman your grandmother was, Jennifer. She turned my worst moment into an opportunity for redemption, and then she never held it over me. Not once in 35 years did she throw it in my face. Until Carol found out and used it like a knife." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope, the paper cream-colored and slightly worn, as if it had been carried for a long time. My name was written across the front in May's handwriting. "May gave this to me a week before she died," Ray said, placing it on the table between us. "She was very specific. She said, 'Ray, when the truth comes out about everything, when Jennifer knows about Carol and about you, and about all the things I've tried to protect people from, give her this letter. Not before. She needs to understand the full context first.'" He pushed it toward me with shaking fingers. "I think now is that time. I think she'd want you to have this before tomorrow's ruling." I stared at the envelope, my heart pounding. Another letter from May. Another piece of the elaborate plan she'd constructed to guide me through this nightmare, even after death. I picked it up carefully, feeling the weight of whatever truth May had left inside. "I'm sorry, Jennifer," Ray said, standing slowly. "I know that doesn't fix anything. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I needed you to know that I love you, that I never stopped loving you, even when I was too weak to show it properly. May knew that. She forgave me because she saw something in me worth saving. I hope someday you might too. He walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the knob. Whatever the judge says tomorrow, I'll back you up. I'll testify against Carol if they need me to. It's 35 years too late, but I'm finally going to do the right thing. After he left, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, holding May's envelope, thinking about forgiveness and weakness and the complicated ways people fail each other while still deserving grace. Finally, as midnight approached, I carefully opened the seal and began to read my grandmother's final words. May's letter that Ray had delivered was brief but powerful, reiterating her forgiveness of his past mistake and her hope that I would understand why he'd been vulnerable to Carol's manipulation. Ray is weak sometimes, but not evil, she'd written. Carol is the architect of cruelty. Ray is just one of her tools. Forgive him if you can, Jenny. He'll need your strength in the days ahead. I'd read those words 3 times before finally falling into fitful sleep around 2 a.m. Now 6 hours later, I sat in the packed courtroom with Marion beside me, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles had gone white. Judge Morrison entered at exactly 9 o'clock, her expression grave and unreadable. The bailiff called us to order, and the room fell into complete silence. I've spent considerable time reviewing all evidence testimonies and legal briefs in this matter. Judge Morrison began, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. I want to state for the record that this is one of the clearest cases of trust violation I've encountered in 30 years on the bench. I felt Marion's hand squeeze my shoulder gently as the judge continued. The evidence presented establishes beyond question that May Blake was fully competent when she created the Qualified Personal Residence Trust in 2004. Multiple witnesses, including her physician, her banker, and longtime friends, have testified to her mental acuity. The contemporaneous business records kept by Michael Alvarez demonstrate a woman who was meticulous, deliberate, and entirely aware of her choices. Judge Morrison's gaze moved to Carol and her voice hardened. The defendant's claims that May Blake was mentally incompetent are not only unsupported by evidence, they are contradicted by overwhelming testimony to the contrary. Carol sat rigid beside her attorney, her face drained of color. Furthermore, the judge continued, the evidence shows that Carol Blake violated the explicit terms of the QPRT by selling the property without obtaining Jennifer Blake's written consent as required. This violation is clear, documented, and indisputable. She paused, her expression darkening. What troubles this court most deeply, however, is the evidence of a decades-long pattern of financial exploitation. Mr. Alvarez's records confirmed by May Blake's own signature document 40 years of theft, forgery, and manipulation. This was not a single mistake or misunderstanding. This was systematic abuse of trust. I watched as Carol's attorney Hastings shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He'd clearly not expected such an unambiguous condemnation. Therefore, Judge Morrison said, I am issuing summary judgment in favor of Jennifer Blake on all counts. Carol Blake is ordered to repay the full $500,000 in sale proceeds to the May Blake Charitable Trust immediately. All remaining funds in the bank accounts of Carol Blake. Ray Blake and Megan Blake are hereby frozen and will be seized to satisfy this judgment. Carol stood abruptly, her mouth opening as if to protest, but Hastings grabbed her arm and pulled her back down, whispering urgently in her ear. Judge Morrison wasn't finished. Additionally, the sale of the property is voided. Title reverts to the trust with Jennifer Blake as the rightful remainder beneficiary. Carol Blake is further ordered to pay Jennifer Blake's legal fees, which currently total $45,000. She looked directly at Carol, now her expression cold. I am also referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for possible criminal prosecution. The pattern of behavior documented here suggests multiple violations of state law regarding elder financial abuse, forgery, and fraud. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through my entire body. Court is adjourned. The courtroom erupted in whispers. I sat frozen, unable to fully process what had just happened. Marion was speaking to me, her voice excited and triumphant, but her words seemed to come from very far away. I'd won. After months of betrayal, isolation, and public humiliation, I'd finally won. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded us immediately. Marion handled them with professional efficiency, making a brief statement about justice being served and the importance of protecting vulnerable, elderly individuals from financial exploitation. I stood beside her numb, answering a few basic questions, but feeling strangely disconnected from the moment I'd been fighting toward for so long. Across the courthouse steps, I saw my family. Ray stood about 10 feet away from Carol and Megan, deliberately separate his face, a mask of grief and shame. Megan was crying her expensive sunglasses, doing nothing to hide her tears. And Carol stood perfectly still, staring at nothing, her expensive outfit somehow looking cheap and tawdry in the harsh morning sunlight. For just a moment our eyes met, and I saw something I'd never seen in my mother's face before: defeat. Not anger or defiance or calculation, just pure, absolute defeat. I felt no triumph in that moment, no joy or satisfaction. Just a vast, hollow emptiness where my family used to be. As the reporters finally dispersed and Marion went to file some follow-up paperwork, I felt a gentle touch on my arm. Mrs. Chen stood beside me, her kind eyes full of understanding. "Your grandmother would be so proud of you," she said softly. "You fought for what was right, even when it cost you everything. It doesn't feel like a victory." I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "That's because you're a good person," Mrs. Chen said. "Bad people feel triumphant when they hurt others. Good people feel the weight of necessary pain." She squeezed my arm. "But Jennifer, dear, you need to understand something. Victory isn't the end of this journey. It's just the beginning of healing. The hard part comes next, deciding what kind of person you'll be with your power. Will you use it to punish or to build? That's the real test your grandmother set for you." Her words settled over me like a mantle heavy with responsibility. May hadn't just left me a house or money. She'd left me a choice about what kind of person I would become. That afternoon, I drove to May's house alone. Marion had given me the new keys, and my hands shook as I unlocked the front door for the first time as its legal owner. The house was exactly as I'd last seen it, still mostly empty from Carol's hasty sale preparations, the piano still standing in its place by the window. I walked slowly through the rooms, memories flooding back with every step. The kitchen where May had taught me to bake, the living room where we'd read together, the bedroom where I'd held her hand as she took her final breaths. It was mine now, truly mine, protected by May's careful planning and my willingness to fight for it. As I stood in the entryway trying to decide what to feel, my eye caught something on the small table by the door. An envelope, cream-colored and official-looking, that definitely hadn't been there during my last visit. My heart began to race as I picked it up and saw May's handwriting across the front: "The second will open only after the court decides in your favor." My hands trembled as I stared at the envelope. Another document, another layer to May's elaborate plan. What else could she possibly have left for me to discover? What other secrets was I about to learn? I carried the envelope to the piano bench, the place where this entire journey had begun, with a hidden key and a letter. Sitting in the same spot where I'd found May's first clues, I carefully broke the seal and pulled out several pages of legal documents topped with a handwritten note. "My darling Jenny," May had written in her shaky script. "If you're reading this, the court has ruled in your favor. Justice has been served. But the house and the legal victory were never the real inheritance. Now it's time to show you what I truly want you to build, with what I've left behind." I turned to the first page of the legal document beneath the note, and my breath caught as I read the words at the top: "Last will and testament of May Elizabeth Blake Codicil and full asset disclosure." The second will revealed assets I'd never known May possessed. Beyond the house, she'd accumulated nearly $3 million through careful investing over decades, stock portfolios, municipal bonds, a life insurance policy. But the document came with conditions. I was to use a significant portion to create May's Place, a community center for isolated elderly people. May's vision was clear and specific, written in legal language but infused with her characteristic warmth and generosity. I sat in that empty house reading until the light faded, understanding that May hadn't just left me wealth, she'd left me a mission. 3 days after the judgment, I made the mistake of checking social media. A friend had sent me a concerned message with a link to Carol's Facebook page. My stomach turned as I read her post. Sometimes the legal system fails families. My mother is gone. My daughter has chosen money over family, and I'm being punished for trying to make practical decisions during grief. Praying for healing and forgiveness for those who've hurt us. The post had been up for less than 12 hours and already had over 300 comments. So sorry you're going through this. Family should come first, not greed. I'll pray for you and your family during this difficult time. Person after person expressing sympathy for Carol, believing her carefully crafted narrative of victimhood, never questioning whether there might be another side to the story. Megan had shared it with her own edition, a tearful selfie accompanied by the caption, "When your own family chooses money over love, heartbroken for my mom." Her post had generated hundreds more sympathetic responses. I scrolled through Ray's page, but he'd posted nothing, maintaining his usual social media silence. Not defending me, but at least not actively participating in Carol's fiction. I called Marian immediately, my voice shaking with renewed anger. "She's doing it again. She's lying to everyone, making herself look like the victim." Marian's response was measured and professional. "Jennifer, I understand your frustration, but my advice is to stay quiet. Let the legal victory speak for itself. Engaging in a public battle will only drag you down to her level. The people who matter know the truth." But later that evening, when Mrs. Chen called to check on me and I mentioned Carol's post, her response was entirely different. "Sometimes silence enables lies to grow," she said firmly. "Your grandmother documented everything for 40 years for a reason, Jennifer. Not just for the courts, but for the truth to be known. Carol is out there right now poisoning the well, making people think you're the villain. If you don't speak up, her version becomes the only version people remember." I spent that night wrestling with the decision. I wasn't naturally confrontational. The idea of holding a press conference, of putting myself in front of cameras and making private family pain even more public made my stomach churn. But Mrs. Chen was right. Watching Carol manipulate public sympathy while portraying herself as a grieving daughter, wronged by her greedy child, felt like watching May's truth be slowly erased. May had spent 40 years documenting Carol's betrayals. She'd built an entire legal framework to reveal the truth. What was the point of all that if I let Carol's lies stand unchallenged? The next morning, I called Marian back. "I want to hold a press conference. I want to release the evidence publicly, all of it." There was a long pause, then Marian said quietly, "Are you sure? Once you do this, there's no taking it back. Your family's dirty laundry will be on display for the entire community." May wanted transparency. I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She documented everything because she wanted the truth known. I'm not going to let her be remembered as a confused old woman who was manipulated. I'm going to show everyone exactly who she was and what Carol did to her. Marian arranged everything for that afternoon at the county courthouse steps. Local reporters showed up, drawn by the ongoing drama of the estate case and curious about what new development warranted a press conference. I stood between Marian and Michael, my hands gripping the podium to keep them from shaking as cameras focused on me and microphones captured every word. "My name is Jennifer Blake." I began, my voice surprisingly steady despite my racing heart. 3 days ago, my mother posted on social media portraying herself as a victim of an unjust legal system. I'm here today to present the truth that she doesn't want you to know. For the next 20 minutes, I laid it all out. I explained the 40-year pattern of theft and forgery that Michael's notebooks documented. I described the QPRT May had created specifically to protect against Carol's greed. I read passages from May's own journals, her confirmed entries describing incident after incident of betrayal, and her heartbreaking decision to forgive repeatedly while knowing she had to protect others from Carol's destructive behavior. Marion displayed enlarged copies of forged checks, bank statements showing unauthorized withdrawals, side-by-side comparisons of Carol's handwriting and May's. Michael stepped forward and read directly from his notebooks, May's signature visible on every page, confirming the accuracy of the records. The reporter's expressions shifted as the evidence accumulated. I watched understanding dawn, watched skepticism transform into shock, and then into something like anger on behalf of a woman they'd never met, but whose systematic exploitation was now undeniable. My grandmother was not confused or easily manipulated, I said, my voice breaking slightly with emotion. She was brilliant, strategic, and heartbroken. She loved her daughter desperately, but she wasn't blind. She created a legal framework to reveal the truth because she knew Carol would lie when finally held accountable. Everything you've heard from my mother about me being greedy or manipulative is projection. The truth is in these documents, in May's own words, confirmed by her own signature over 40 years. The evening news that night led with a very different headline than Carol's narrative, 40-year pattern of elder financial abuse exposed in local estate case. The report included footage from our press conference, images of the forged documents, and interviews with legal experts discussing the implications of such systematic exploitation. Carol's Facebook post, once filled with sympathetic comments, was now flooded with angry responses from people who'd seen the evidence. "You should be ashamed. How could you steal from your own mother for decades? That poor woman and that poor granddaughter having to expose all this publicly." I sat in my apartment that night, exhausted and emotionally drained, watching the coverage. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired and sad, and somehow dirtied by having to air such painful private truths in such a public forum. But I also felt like I'd honored May's wishes. She'd wanted the truth known, had spent decades ensuring it would be, and now it finally was. My phone rang at nearly 10 o'clock, an unknown number lighting up the screen. Normally I wouldn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Is this Jennifer Blake?" a woman's voice asked, trembling and uncertain. "Yes," I said warily. "Who is this?" "My name is Helen Morse," the woman said, and I heard her voice catch. "I'm the person who bought your grandmother's house from your mother. I just saw the news coverage and I think I need to talk to you. I think I'm about to lose everything because of your mother's lies." Helen's call had left me shaken, but I told her I'd call back in the morning after I'd had time to review the second will more carefully. I needed to understand the full scope of what May had left me before I could help anyone else. That night, I called Marion and asked her to come to my apartment first thing in the morning to review the documents officially. Marion arrived at 8 o'clock sharp, her briefcase in hand and her expression serious. We spread the second will across my kitchen table, and she examined every page with meticulous attention to detail, checking signatures, dates, witness attestations, and notary seals. "This is absolutely legitimate," she said finally. "Properly executed, legally binding, dated 6 months before May's death." She was very deliberate about this. I read through the asset disclosure section again, still struggling to absorb the numbers. May owned a stock portfolio worth $2.8 million, built up over decades of careful investing. She held $400,000 in municipal bonds. She had a life insurance policy worth $500,000 with me named as the sole beneficiary. The total estate was worth nearly $4 million. "I had no idea," I whispered. "She lived so simply. That little house, her old car, shopping at thrift stores, clipping coupons. I thought she was just getting by on her Social Security and a small pension." "May Blake was extraordinarily frugal," Marion said, a note of admiration in her voice. "But not because she had to be, because she chose to be. She was building something, Jennifer. This was her plan all along." The conditions section made May's vision crystal clear. I inherited everything, but with a binding legal obligation, I had to convert May's house into May's place. a community center specifically designed for elderly people who were isolated, had limited family support, or needed resources and companionship. The will set aside $1 million explicitly for renovation and the first 3 years of operational costs. The remaining assets were to be placed in an endowment with the investment returns funding May's place in perpetuity. There was a handwritten note attached to the conditions section, May's shaky script covering a full page. Jennifer, I didn't leave you wealth to keep for yourself. I left you wealth to share with people who need it. Build the community center I always dreamed of, creating a place where people like me, people who gave everything to family that didn't appreciate or deserve it, can still find dignity, purpose, and love in their final years. Make it a home for the forgotten ones, the ones whose children are too busy or too selfish to care. Give them what I was lucky enough to have with you: genuine connection, respect, and belonging. I felt tears streaming down my face as I read May's words. This wasn't just an inheritance. This was a mission, a calling, a responsibility that would define the rest of my life. It's a lot, Marian said gently, watching my face. Jennifer, you need to understand that if you accept this inheritance with these conditions, you're legally bound to fulfill them. You can't just take the money and do something else with it. If you decide the burden is too heavy, you have the right to decline. In that case, the assets would go to the charitable organizations May specified as alternates. I looked at the document again, at the careful planning May had done, at the trust she'd placed in me to carry forward her vision. This was why she'd chosen me over Carol, not just because I was trustworthy with money, but because I understood what really mattered. Because I'd seen May volunteer at the senior center every week, bringing homemade soup to elderly neighbors, sitting with lonely widows at church. Because I'd watched her give without counting the cost, love without conditions, build community through simple acts of kindness. I'm not going to decline, I said, my voice firm despite the overwhelming weight of responsibility settling onto my shoulders. This is exactly what May would have wanted. This is what she spent her whole life working toward. I'll build May's place. I'll honor her vision. Marian smiled, something like relief crossing her face. I was hoping you'd say that. May was right about you, Jennifer. She knew you'd understand. But even as I accepted this enormous responsibility, my mind returned to Helen Morse's trembling voice on the phone, an innocent woman who'd been caught up in Carol's web of lies, who was about to lose everything because she'd trusted the wrong person. Marian, before we start planning May's place, I need to help Helen, I said. If my mother defrauded her, if Helen is going to lose her savings because Carol lied to her, that's not right. That's not what May would have wanted. Marian nodded slowly. Helen Morse is legally the current owner of the house since the sale went through before we voided it. But if there are undisclosed liens or if Carol made fraudulent representations, Helen could have claims against Carol. The situation is complicated. I need to talk to her, I said. I need to understand exactly what happened. I called Helen back that afternoon, putting her on speaker so Marian could hear. Helen's voice was shaky and exhausted, the voice of someone who'd spent sleepless nights worrying about a problem too big to solve. Tell me everything that happened, I said gently. If my mother lied to you, we'll find a way to make it right. Helen took a shaky breath before beginning. I'm 72 years old. I taught elementary school for 40 years, saved every penny I could. When my husband died 3 years ago, I used his life insurance and my pension lump sum to finally buy a house. I wanted to be near my grandchildren, and your mother's listing for May's house seemed perfect. The price was $500,000, which was everything I had, but she assured me it was move-in ready, no problems, completely free and clear. Her voice caught. But 2 weeks ago, I got a letter from a company claiming there's a lien on the property for $150,000. They say your grandmother took out a home improvement loan that was never paid back. The company is threatening to foreclose unless I pay it. But Jennifer, I don't have that money. I spent everything I had on the purchase price. I thought I was buying my retirement dream, and now I'm about to lose everything. My heart sank. Another layer of Carol's deception, another innocent victim caught in the wreckage. "The lien is fraudulent," Marion said immediately. "May Blake never took out any home improvement loan. We've reviewed all her financial records. This is almost certainly forged documentation." "But the company says they have paperwork," Helen said, her voice breaking. "They have signatures, loan agreements. I don't know how to fight this. I'm just a retired teacher. I don't have money for lawyers or investigators. I'm terrified I'm going to end up homeless because I trusted the wrong person." I looked at Marion, then at May's will still spread across my table at the mission she'd entrusted to me. May had spent her life helping people. She'd forgiven Carol repeatedly, not because she was weak, but because she believed in giving people dignity even when they didn't deserve it. And now I had the power to help someone Carol had victimized to choose mercy over strict legal rights. "Helen," I said, "I promise you we're going to figure this out. You're not going to lose your home. My mother created this mess, and I'm going to help clean it up." I arranged to meet Helen the following afternoon at a quiet diner on the edge of town, a place where we could talk privately without running into people who might recognize us from the news coverage. Marion came with me, bringing her legal pad and the files we'd started building on the property's tangled history. Helen Morse was already there when we arrived, sitting in a back booth with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had clearly gone cold. She was a small woman with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing a cardigan that looked handmade and glasses that magnified eyes filled with worry and exhaustion. When she stood to greet us, her hands trembled slightly, and I could see the toll this situation had taken on her. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, her voice soft and grateful. "I didn't know where else to turn." As we settled into the booth, Helen told us her story with the kind of methodical detail that came from years of teaching, organizing her thoughts carefully despite her obvious distress. She'd taught second grade for 40 years in a neighboring county, she explained, living frugally and saving every penny she could. When her husband Gerald died 3 years ago from a sudden heart attack, the life insurance payout combined with her pension lump sum gave her just enough to finally buy a small house. Her grandchildren lived in our town, and she dreamed of being close enough to see them regularly, to be part of their daily lives in a way geography had prevented before. "When I saw your mother's listing for May's house, it seemed like a sign from God," Helen said, her voice catching slightly. $500,000 was every cent I had, but the house was beautiful, the neighborhood was perfect, and your mother assured me it was in excellent condition. She said move-in ready, no issues, completely free and clear. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? She was the daughter of the woman who'd owned the house. I thought she'd want to see it go to someone who would love it the way her mother had. The sale had closed quickly. Helen continued, with Carol pushing for a rapid timeline that Helen had assumed was normal. Helen had paid the full amount, received the keys, and started planning her move. That's when the problems began. 2 weeks ago, I received a certified letter from something called Pinnacle Investment Group, Helen said, pulling a crumpled envelope from her purse. They claim there's a lien on the property for $150,000. They say May took out a home improvement loan 5 years ago that was never repaid, and now they're demanding I either pay the full amount immediately or they'll foreclose. Marion took the letter and examined it closely, her expression darkening as she read. Did Carol disclose this lien during the sale process? No, Helen said firmly. The title company found no liens. The sale was supposed to be clean. But this company says they filed the lien after the sale closed, but dated it retroactively based on the original loan documents. She wiped her eyes with a tissue. I don't have another $150,000. I don't have anything left at all. But that wasn't the only problem. Helen explained that 3 days ago she'd been contacted by a man named Derek Sutton, who claimed to be an investor with a stake in the property. Sutton had been aggressive and threatening, insisting that Carol had promised him a 30% share in the resale profits as part of a house-flipping arrangement. He said he gave your mother $150,000 in cash to facilitate a quick flip, Helen said, her voice shaking. The plan was supposedly that I would buy the house, then he would buy it from me at a markup within 6 months and they'd split the profits. But I never agreed to any of that. I didn't even know he existed until he showed up at the house demanding I honor their agreement. Marion and I exchanged glances. The pieces were coming together into a picture even uglier than we'd imagined. "Helen, I need you to understand something," Marion said gently. "The lien is almost certainly fraudulent. We've reviewed May Blake's complete financial records going back decades. She never took out any home improvement loan. Someone forged those documents, and given everything else we know, it was likely Carol." Helen's face crumpled. "So I'm caught in the middle of a fraud scheme. I spent my entire life savings on a house I might not actually own." Over the next hour, Marion and I investigated further, making calls and reviewing documents. The picture that emerged was damning. Derek Sutton was a small-time house flipper with a checkered reputation. He confirmed to Marion over the phone that he'd given Carol $150,000 in cash under the table to avoid taxes, with the understanding that they'd profit from a quick resale scheme. Carol had taken his money and apparently spent it probably on the Hawaii vacation and other expenses, never intending to honor their agreement. The fraudulent lien appeared to be Carol's creation as well, a desperate attempt to extract more money from the situation by forcing Helen to pay a fictional debt. The forged signatures on the loan documents were crude enough that a handwriting expert would immediately identify them as fake, but Helen didn't have resources to hire experts or fight legal battles. "Helen is completely innocent in all of this," I said, feeling sick. "She saved for 15 years, used every penny she had, and Carol defrauded her at every turn." Marion reviewed the legal documents spread across the diner table, her expression grim. "This is fraud on multiple levels. Forging loan documents, creating false liens, taking money from Sutton with no intention of fulfilling the agreement, making material misrepresentations to Helen during the sale. Carol could face serious prison time for this. But understanding that doesn't help Helen's immediate problem." "What are her options?" I asked. Marion looked at me seriously. "Legally, the situation is complex. The sale went through before we voided it in court, which means Helen technically owns the house now. But the fraudulent lien clouds the title, and Sutton has a legitimate claim against Carol for the money she took from him. We could help Helen fight the lien, prove it's fraudulent, which would clear her title. But Sutton's claim is different. He gave Carol real money. He has the right to try to recover it." "From Helen?" I asked, horrified. "Sutton will go after whoever he can," Marion said. "Carol's assets are frozen. Helen is vulnerable. And Jennifer, there's something else you need to consider." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Because the judge voided the sale in his ruling, you could potentially argue that Helen's purchase was never valid, that the house should revert directly to you as the rightful heir. Legally, you might be able to reclaim it entirely." Helen's face went white. "I'd lose everything, the house and all the money I paid." "You'd have claims against Carol for return of your purchase price," Marion explained. "But Carol has no money. You'd win a judgment you could never collect. Practically speaking, you'd be left with nothing." I looked at Helen's trembling hands, at her kind, exhausted face, at this woman who'd worked for 40 years and saved diligently and done everything right, only to be victimized by my mother's endless greed. I thought about May's letter about building a community for people who'd been let down by family, about using wealth to help rather than hoard. "We're not doing that," I said firmly. "We're not taking Helen's home. That's not who May was, and it's not who I am." Marion nodded slowly, respect in her eyes. "Then we need to find another solution, one that protects Helen and still holds Carol accountable." That evening, Marion and I sat in her office reviewing Helen's situation from every possible angle. Marion had her legal pad covered in notes diagrams, showing the various claims and counterclaims, potential strategies mapped out like a chess game. "Let me lay out your options clearly," Marion said, her tone professional but not unsympathetic. "Option 1, we argue that because the sale was voided by the judge's ruling, Helen's purchase was never legally valid. The house reverts directly to you as May's heir. Helen would have claims against Carol for return of her $500,000, but Carol has no assets to satisfy that judgment. Helen loses everything, practically speaking, but you get the house free and clear. I felt sick just hearing it described that way. Option 2, Marion continued. You absorb some financial loss yourself to protect Helen. You could pay off Derek Sutton's claim, clear the fraudulent lien, and let Helen keep the house. This costs you money from your inheritance, but it solves Helen's immediate crisis. What's option 3? I asked. Option 3 is we try to find some creative middle ground, Marion said. Maybe Helen pays you some reduced amount for clear title. Maybe we negotiate with Sutton for less than he's claiming. Maybe we find other ways to split the losses. But honestly, Jennifer, my professional advice is option 1. You owe Helen nothing legally. She failed to do proper due diligence. She trusted Carol without adequate verification. You've already lost months of your life to this nightmare, been publicly humiliated, nearly lost your job. Why should you absorb more financial loss to fix Carol's fraud? I sat quietly thinking about May. May, who'd spent $15,000 of her own money to pay medical bills for the woman Ray had injured while driving drunk. May, who'd forgiven Carol time after time, even knowing she'd likely be betrayed again. May, who'd lived in that small house wearing thrift store clothes while sitting on millions of dollars because she valued helping others over personal comfort. What would May do? I asked quietly. Marion smiled sadly. You already know the answer to that. I did. May would choose mercy over strict legal rights. May would find a way to help Helen, even if it cost her something, because that's who she was. I'll pay off Derek Sutton, I said, my voice firm. The full $150,000 he claims Carol took, plus another $15,000 as interest for his time and trouble. That's $165,000 total. In exchange, he releases all claims against Helen and signs a document stating the matter is fully resolved. Marion nodded slowly. And the fraudulent lien. We'll fight it, prove it's forged, get it removed. I'll pay the legal fees, probably around $5,000. So I'm looking at $170,000 total to make this right for Helen. I looked at Marion steadily. I can afford it. May left me nearly $4 million. I can spend $170,000 to save an innocent woman from losing everything because of my mother's crimes. You're sure about this? Marion asked. Because once we offer Sutton this deal, we can't take it back. I'm sure, I said. Helen worked for 40 years, saved every penny, and trusted the wrong person. I have the power to fix what my mother broke. May would expect me to use that power. The next day, Marion contacted Derek Sutton with our offer. He accepted immediately, clearly relieved to get his money back with interest and avoid a lengthy legal battle. Within a week, we had signed documents releasing Helen from all claims, and Marion had filed the paperwork to challenge the fraudulent lien. I met Helen at her temporary apartment to explain what we'd done. She opened the door looking exhausted and fearful, clearly expecting more bad news. When I told her that Sutton's claim was resolved and the lien would be removed, that she could keep the house free and clear, she simply stood there staring at me in disbelief. I don't understand, she finally whispered. Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me. And you could have taken the house back. You could have let me lose everything and kept your money. Why? I thought about how to explain about May's letters and her lifetime of quiet generosity, about the lesson she'd been trying to teach me through all of this. My grandmother taught me that doing what's right matters more than what's profitable. I said simply, You deserve to enjoy your retirement dream, Helen. You worked hard, you saved diligently, you trusted someone who lied to you. That's not your fault. My mother stole from both of us, but I have the power to make your part right, so that's what I'm doing. Helen broke down crying, and I found myself crying too. Both of us standing in her doorway, embracing like old friends, though we'd met only days ago. I have to pay you back somehow, Helen insisted when she could speak again. I can't just take your money. There has to be something I can do. An idea formed in my mind, connecting to May's vision for the community center. Helen, you taught second grade for 40 years. You must have skills beyond just teaching children. I painted, Helen said, wiping her eyes. Watercolors mostly. I used to teach art classes at the community center in my old town. Why, I'm going to convert May's house into a community center for seniors, I explained. May's place. It was her dream, and now it's my mission. When it opens, would you consider volunteering there? Teaching art classes to other elderly people, sharing your skills and your time. That would mean more to me than any financial repayment. Helen's face transformed with something like hope. I could do that. I'd love to do that. Teaching again, being useful, having a purpose. Yes, Jennifer, yes, I'll volunteer as many hours as you need. We spent another hour talking about May's place, about Helen's ideas for art programs, about the kind of community May had envisioned. By the time I left, Helen looked 10 years younger, the crushing weight of potential homelessness lifted from her shoulders. As I walked to my car in the apartment complex parking lot, a man stepped out from behind a pickup truck. He was in his mid-40s, stocky and rough-looking, wearing jeans and a work jacket. I recognized him from photos Marion had found during our investigation, Derek Sutton. My hand went to my phone, ready to call for help, but Sutton held up his hands in a peaceful gesture. Easy, he said. I'm not here to cause trouble. I heard what you're doing, paying me off to help the old lady. That's decent of you. Most people wouldn't. I'm just trying to clean up my mother's mess, I said, keeping my distance. Yeah, well, about that. Sutton's expression turned serious. There's something I didn't tell your lawyer, something I probably should have mentioned, but I was hoping to just get my money back and walk away clean. My stomach dropped. What? Carol made another deal, Sutton said quietly. With someone else, another investor type, but not like me. This guy, he's not the kind who takes you to court when you don't pay up. He's the kind who makes problems for people in other ways. And Carol owes him money too. A lot of money. Who? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Guy named Vincent Corelli, Sutton said. He's not as nice as me. And Carol promised him a piece of this house deal too. You should know that before you think this is all settled. He walked back to his truck, leaving me standing alone in the parking lot, my brief sense of resolution crumbling, as I realized Carol's schemes went even deeper than I'd imagined. Derek Sutton's warning about Vincent Corelli haunted me for days, but Marion's investigation revealed that Corelli had apparently decided the situation was too publicly scrutinized to pursue his claims. Whatever arrangement Carol had made with him, he'd chosen to write off his losses rather than risk exposure. Still, the revelation that Carol's schemes had been even more extensive than we'd known left me shaken and exhausted. But I couldn't let that stop me from honoring May's vision. 3 months after the judge's ruling, I threw myself completely into converting May's house into May's place. The transformation required extensive work, widening doorways and installing ramps for wheelchair accessibility, gutting, and rebuilding the kitchen to commercial standards, converting May's bedroom into a craft room, turning the dining room into a library and quiet reading space. The project consumed my days and most of my nights. But watching May's house slowly transform into something that could serve the community she'd loved gave me a sense of purpose I desperately needed. Michael Alvarez became an invaluable advisor, reviewing contractor bids and helping me navigate the complex financial decisions involved in such a major renovation. He refused any payment, insisting that helping build May's dream was payment enough for the 40 years of kindness she'd shown him. Mrs. Chen rallied her network of elderly neighbors, organizing donation drives that brought in furniture, books, art supplies, and kitchen equipment. The outpouring of support from people who'd known and loved May was overwhelming. Local businesses that had followed the legal battle in the news began reaching out, offering to help. The hardware store gave me a 30% discount on materials. A furniture company donated tables and chairs for the community room. The bakery down the street committed to providing fresh bread twice weekly at cost. People who'd initially believed Carol's lies about me started appearing at the house awkward and apologetic, asking if there was anything they could do to help. I learned to accept their assistance gracefully, understanding that admitting you were wrong is difficult, and that offering help was their way of making amends. The senior center, which had asked me to stop coming during the worst of the public controversy, now approached me with a formal partnership proposal. They wanted May's Place to be an extension of their programming, a more intimate space where isolated seniors could find community and support. The director, a kind woman named Patricia, who'd known May well, apologized personally for not standing by me when things got difficult. On a Saturday morning in late September, I arrived at the house to find Ray standing on the front porch holding a toolbox and wearing work gloves. We hadn't spoken much since the night he'd confessed about the accident and given me May's letter. Our relationship existed in a strange liminal space, not repaired but not completely broken either. "Thought you could use some help with the porch railing," he said without preamble, not quite meeting my eyes. "I'm pretty good with woodwork." I could have sent him away. Part of me wanted to, but I thought about May forgiving him 35 years ago, about her belief that people deserved second chances even after terrible mistakes. "The railing does need work," I said finally. "Thank you." We worked side by side for hours, mostly in silence, the physical labor creating a space where words weren't necessary. Ray was meticulous with the woodwork, measuring twice, cutting once, his hands steady despite his age. By the end of the day, the porch had a beautiful new railing, and something between us had shifted slightly toward healing. The most unexpected development came through the legal system. Megan had been charged with felony arson, but her attorney had negotiated a plea deal. She would plead guilty to a reduced misdemeanor charge in exchange for cooperation with the investigation into Carol and a sentence of 500 hours of community service. When Marion suggested to the prosecutor that those hours be assigned to May's Place, the judge had agreed, apparently seeing the poetic justice in having Megan help build what she'd tried to destroy. Megan showed up for her first day of service with her jaw set and her eyes hidden behind sunglasses, clearly resentful of the sentence and of me. I assigned her to work with Helen, organizing art supplies in the craft room, a task that seemed safely removed from any opportunities for confrontation. But as the weeks passed, something unexpected happened. The elderly volunteers who came to help people who'd known May and heard stories about her life began talking to Megan. They shared memories of May's kindness, her generosity, her unwavering belief that people mattered more than possessions. Helen, with her gentle teacher's manner, drew Megan into conversations about art and creativity and finding purpose after loss. I watched my sister slowly soften the defensive anger in her posture, gradually giving way to something more thoughtful. She started arriving early for her service hours and staying late. She began actually listening when the elderly volunteers spoke, asking questions about their lives, helping with tasks beyond what was required. One afternoon in early November, I was painting the hallway when Megan appeared beside me, picking up a brush without being asked. We painted in silence for several minutes before she spoke. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, not looking at me. "For the fire. For believing Mom's lies. For not standing up for you when I should have. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just need you to know that I see it now. What Grandma was trying to teach us. What you've been fighting for all along." I didn't respond immediately, just kept painting, processing the apology I'd never expected to hear. "It's going to take time, Meg," I said finally. "Trust doesn't rebuild overnight." "I know," she said, "but I want to try. If you'll let me." It wasn't absolution. It wasn't a return to the relationship we'd had before everything fell apart. But it was something, a small seed of possibility, that maybe eventually we could find our way back to being sisters. On Thursday evening, 2 days before May's Place was scheduled to open, Marion called. Her tone was serious but not quite somber, carrying a weight I couldn't quite identify. "Jennifer, I need you to sit down," she said. My stomach dropped. What happened? The district attorney filed formal charges against Carol this afternoon. 8 counts total: elder financial abuse, forgery, fraud, conspiracy to commit arson, and several related charges. She'll be arrested tomorrow morning. I sat on May's old couch, in what was now the reading room, processing this news. Carol was going to jail. My mother was going to jail. There's something else, Marion continued. The DA's office went through all the evidence we submitted, including items from May's safety deposit box. They found a video recording. A message May recorded before she died. It's 30 minutes long and she addresses each member of the family directly. Jennifer, the DA, thinks this video is important evidence of May's mental state and her intentions, so they're releasing it to us. Michael has a copy. I think you need to watch it before the grand opening. May clearly intended for all of you to see it once the truth came out. My hands were shaking. May's video. Her final words to us recorded when she knew what was coming, when she'd already set everything in motion. Can you bring it tomorrow? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I'll be there at 10 in the morning, Marion said. Jennifer, this is going to be difficult to watch, but I think it's also going to be healing. May knew exactly what she wanted to say. Friday morning arrived gray and cold, matching my mood as I prepared for what I knew would be a difficult day. I was at May's place putting final touches on the reading room when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Ms. Blake, this is Tom Reynolds from Channel 7 News. Can you comment on your mother's arrest this morning? The words hit me like ice water. What? Carol Blake was arrested about an hour ago on multiple felony charges, including elder financial abuse, forgery, fraud, and conspiracy to commit arson. The bail hearing is happening right now. Were you aware of the charges being filed? I ended the call without responding, my hands shaking. I'd known it was coming. Marion had warned me, but hearing that Carol had actually been arrested, was sitting in county jail at this very moment, made it horrifyingly real. Marion called minutes later to explain what she'd done weeks ago, her voice careful and professional. After the civil judgment, I sent all of Michael's documentation to the district attorney. I had a legal obligation, Jennifer. Your grandmother didn't just document family disputes, she documented crimes. Forgery, financial exploitation of an elderly person, fraud. These are serious criminal violations that I couldn't ethically ignore. You didn't tell me, I said, though I couldn't muster any real anger. I wanted the civil case resolved first, Marion explained. I wanted you to have clear title to the house and the inheritance secured before the criminal proceedings complicated everything. The DA reviewed the evidence and agreed that prosecution was warranted. The bail hearing happened quickly. Carol's public defender argued she wasn't a flight risk, that she had ties to the community and nowhere to run. But the prosecutor pointed out that Carol had recently spent $200,000 on a vacation while legal proceedings were pending, demonstrating exactly the kind of reckless financial behavior and disregard for consequences that suggested she might flee. The judge set bail at $100,000, which Carol couldn't possibly make with all her assets frozen. She'd remain in county jail until trial. But there would be no trial. Within days, Carol's attorney contacted the DA about a plea agreement. Faced with 40 years of documented evidence, video footage of the arson testimony from multiple witnesses, and the certainty of conviction, Carol had no real defense. The plea offer was stark. Plead guilty to reduced charges and accept 18 months in county jail, 5 years probation, 1,000 hours of community service after release, mandatory financial counseling, and permanent prohibition from serving as executor or trustee for any estate. The alternative was trial and potentially 8 years in state prison. Carol took the plea. Marion called to inform me of the hearing date, but I told her I wouldn't attend. There was nothing left to say to my mother, no closure to be found in watching her formally admit to crimes we all knew she'd committed. I'd already grieved the loss of the mother I'd wished I had. This was just paperwork finalizing what had been true for months. That evening, Marion arrived at my apartment carrying her laptop, her expression a mixture of solemnity and something else I couldn't quite read. She set the computer on my kitchen table and sat across from me. The district attorney released this to me today, she said quietly. It's technically part of May's estate evidence of her mental state and intentions. Jennifer, your grandmother recorded a video message 6 weeks before she died. Michael helped her do it in his office. It's 30 minutes long. Marion paused, her eyes meeting mine. She addresses each of you by name, you, Carol Ray Megan. She wanted it shown to the family only after the legal truth came out, after everyone understood the full scope of what had happened. My throat tightened. Have you watched it? Yes, Marion said. It's difficult. But it's also exactly what May intended, one final chance to speak truth to all of you, to explain her choices, to offer what she always offered. Grace, even in the face of betrayal. She opened the laptop and turned the screen toward me. There, frozen in the first frame of the video, was May, sitting in an office chair, looking frail, but with eyes that were clear and focused. My grandmother speaking to me from beyond death with truths I wasn't sure I was ready to hear. May's video had been everything Marion warned it would be: difficult, painful, but also filled with the kind of unflinching honesty and grace that had defined my grandmother's character. Watching her speak directly to Carol about decades of betrayal to Ray, about forgiveness already given to Megan, about wasted potential, and to me about the responsibility I now carried, had left me emotionally exhausted, but also strangely at peace. May had said her piece, and now it was up to each of us to decide what to do with her final words. The months that followed brought unexpected changes to everyone May's video had addressed. Carol began her 18-month sentence in county jail, a facility that was less harsh than state prison, but still represented a complete loss of freedom. At first, her letters to me were defensive and bitter, full of justifications and accusations that I was destroying the family. But as weeks turned to months and mandatory therapy sessions forced her to confront patterns she'd spent a lifetime avoiding, the tone began to shift. She wrote about childhood wounds I'd never known about feeling abandoned even after May adopted her, about a lifetime of trying to fill an emptiness that money could never satisfy. The letters gradually took on a quality of remorse that felt, if not entirely genuine, at least more honest than anything she'd expressed before. I didn't respond to most of them. When I finally did, 8 months into her sentence, my reply was brief and clear. I hope you find peace, Mom, but I can't be part of your healing journey. I need to focus on mine. It was the truth. Whatever redemption Carol might find would have to come from within herself, not from my forgiveness or participation in her recovery. Megan's transformation was more visible and in some ways more surprising. She completed her mandated 500 hours of community service at May's place, but instead of leaving once her legal obligation was fulfilled, she kept coming back. She started teaching weekly watercolor classes for seniors, discovering a natural gift for working with elderly students who appreciated her patience and creativity. One Thursday afternoon, I found her in what had been May's bedroom and was now my small office, standing in the doorway with an expression I'd rarely seen on her face, genuine humility. I don't expect forgiveness, she said without preamble. I don't even know if I deserve it, but I need you to know that I see it now. What Grandma was trying to teach us. I'm sorry I was too stupid and selfish to understand before I nearly destroyed everything. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw someone who'd been fundamentally changed by consequences and grace operating in tandem. You can't undo what happened, Meg, I said quietly. But you can choose differently going forward. That's what Grandma would say. Ray's path to redemption was quieter, but no less significant. He became a fixture at May's place every weekend, showing up with his toolbox to handle repairs and maintenance with steady, careful hands. He'd started attending AA meetings again and had begun sponsoring other men wrestling with past mistakes and present struggles. He never asked me directly for forgiveness, never made grand speeches about his regrets. Instead, he simply showed up week after week, proving through consistent action what words could never fully convey. One Saturday, as we repainted the community room side by side, working in the comfortable silence that had replaced our earlier awkwardness, I found myself thinking about May's video and what she'd said about Ray. Grandma's video said you were a good man, I said, not stopping my work with the roller. I'm starting to believe she was right. Ray's hand stilled on his brush, and when I glanced over, I saw tears streaming down his face. "I don't deserve your kindness, Jenny." "Probably not." I agreed and saw him flinch slightly. "But Grandma taught me that grace isn't about deserving. It's about choosing mercy anyway, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." The day before May's place was scheduled to open officially, a package arrived at my apartment with no return address. Inside was a photo album I'd never seen, its leather cover worn soft with age. The pages held pictures spanning decades, May as a young woman in the 1960s, vibrant and smiling. May with a tiny Carol, both looking hopeful. May holding infant me with joy radiating from her face. May at various stages of her life, always surrounded by people she was helping, serving, loving. Tucked in the back was a note in handwriting I recognized as Michael's, from someone who knew May before you did. "She'd want you to have the whole story." As I turned each page, seeing the full arc of May's generous, complicated, beautiful life, I understood that tomorrow's opening wasn't just about a building or a program. It was about continuing a legacy of love that had survived betrayal, overcome greed, and ultimately transformed everyone it touched. I spent that evening absorbed in the photo album, each page revealing layers of May's life I'd never fully understood. The early photos showed her as a young woman in her 20s, radiant and full of hope, standing beside a tall man with kind eyes who must have been her first husband. He'd died in the early 70s, leaving May a widow at 45. Then came photos of Carol's adoption in 1965. May holding a frightened 3-year-old with such tenderness that it made my chest ache. The subsequent pages chronicled Carol's childhood and adolescence, each photo captioned in May's careful handwriting: Carol's first day of school, Carol's graduation, Carol's wedding to Ray. Despite everything I now knew, May's love for her daughter shone through every image, every careful notation. The later photos showed Sarah with infant me, then May holding me with an expression of pure joy. These were the images of the family I remembered, the family that had felt whole and safe. A handwritten letter tucked near the back of the album, dated 1985, stopped me cold. May had written to herself, "I've given everything to Carol, and she still takes more, but I can't stop loving her. Is that strength or foolishness? Time will tell." Even then, 39 years ago, May had known. She'd seen Carol's pattern clearly, but chose love anyway, documenting the truth while extending grace. I understood then that Michael had sent this album as the final piece of May's elaborate plan. May hadn't been naive or easily fooled. She'd loved Carol, fully aware of her daughter's flaws, hoping against evidence that Carol might change. The QPRT, the meticulous documentation, the video message, none of it was about revenge or cruelty. It was May's way of protecting me while still giving Carol every opportunity to choose integrity over greed. May had set up a system where Carol's own actions would determine the outcome. If Carol had respected my rights and May's wishes, everyone would have benefited from the estate. By choosing deception and theft, Carol had triggered consequences May had carefully designed to be both just and educational. The next morning, I met with Marion and Michael to finalize the endowment structure for May's place. The remaining $1.8 million from May's estate would be invested conservatively, with the returns funding operations indefinitely. But as Marion walked me through the trust documents, she pointed out a clause I'd glossed over in earlier readings. "When you're no longer able to manage May's place, either through death, incapacity, or personal choice, control doesn't pass to your heirs or relatives," Marion explained. "It transfers to a community board selected according to very specific criteria. That board then chooses future leadership based solely on demonstrated character." May wrote it explicitly: "They must select the person who best embodies kindness, integrity, and service to isolated elderly people, regardless of relationship to the Blake family." I sat back, absorbing the implications. May hadn't created a family dynasty or ensured that her bloodline would control her legacy. She'd created something far more profound, a mission that would outlive all of us, sustained by people who shared her values rather than her DNA. "She was brilliant," Michael said softly. She knew that true legacy isn't about passing wealth to relatives. It's about embedding values into structures that will carry those values forward long after we're gone. That night, exhausted from final preparations for tomorrow's opening, I fell into bed and immediately into deep sleep. In my dream, I was standing in front of May's house, but it looked different, glowing somehow in golden afternoon light. May sat on the porch in her favorite rocking chair, looking exactly as she had before illness ravaged her body, healthy, whole, at peace. She smiled at me with such warmth that I felt tears streaming down my face even in the dream. "You did it, Jenny," she said, her voice as clear as if she were really there. "You understood the fine print, the real one, not the legal words but the truth underneath. Love is a choice. Family is built through action, not assumption. Legacy is measured in changed lives, not dollars passed down." She stood and walked to the door, pushing it open wide. "Now open the door and let everyone in. That's what this house was always meant for." I woke with the sensation of her hand on my shoulder, her presence so real that for a moment I forgot she was gone. Then I remembered tomorrow was the grand opening. Tomorrow May's place would finally become what she'd always envisioned: a home for the lonely, a refuge for the forgotten, a community built on the foundation of unconditional love. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline autumn beauty that felt like a blessing. The sky was impossibly blue, the air crisp and clean, and as I stood on the front porch of May's place, watching the sun illuminate the newly painted sign above the door, I felt her presence so strongly it took my breath away. The house had been completely transformed. Wheelchair ramps with elegant railings led to a wide front porch, lined with rocking chairs where people could sit and watch the world go by. Inside, the living room had become a warm community gathering space with comfortable couches and chairs arranged to encourage conversation. The kitchen gleamed with commercial equipment ready to serve daily meals. Upstairs, the bedrooms had been converted into activity rooms, one for art classes, one for music and book clubs, one equipped with computers for technology tutoring. In the backyard, raised garden beds built at accessible heights allowed elderly residents to grow vegetables and flowers together. By 10 o'clock, over 200 people had gathered on the lawn and sidewalk, far more than I'd expected. The crowd included elderly community members, local officials, business owners who'd supported the renovation volunteers, who'd worked tirelessly to make this day possible, and reporters covering what had become a symbol of justice and redemption in our small town. Mrs. Chen stood near the front, beaming with pride, holding the oversized scissors we'd used to cut the ribbon stretched across the doorway. Marion had organized a brief program of speakers. Chen went first, her voice strong despite her 82 years, talking about May's decades of quiet generosity and how this center embodied everything May had believed about community and compassion. Helen Morse followed, presenting a watercolor painting she'd created, showing May's house in 2 panels: the past, with May tending her roses, and the present with the doors thrown open and people streaming inside. The painting captured something essential about transformation and continuity, and I knew immediately it would hang in the entrance hall. Michael Alvarez stepped forward next, holding one of May's journals. He read a passage she'd written 5 years before her death. "I dream of a place where lonely people can find friendship, where those whose families forgot them can feel valued, where age is honored rather than hidden away. If I can't build it in my lifetime, perhaps I can build the foundation for someone else to complete." His voice broke slightly on the final words, and I saw several people in the crowd wiping their eyes. Then it was my turn. I stood before the microphone looking at all these faces and found my voice steadier than I'd expected. My grandmother taught me from childhood to read the fine print, to look beneath the surface for deeper meanings. She lived that lesson every day, seeing beneath people's facades to their true character, understanding that the most important things are often written in the smallest print, where most people don't bother to look. I paused, gathering my thoughts. May's place is the fine print of her life, made visible: love and action, community, over isolation, character, over comfort. This house is no longer mine or hers. It belongs to everyone who needs it. everyone who walks through that door seeking connection and dignity. Welcome home. The applause was warm and sustained. Together, Mrs. Chen and I cut the ribbon, and the crowd surged forward to tour the transformed house, exclaiming over the bright rooms and thoughtful details that made the space both functional and welcoming. During the celebration, as I stood in the kitchen watching Helen direct volunteers serving refreshments, a woman I didn't recognize approached me. She was well-dressed, probably in her early 60s, with kind eyes and a tentative smile. "Jennifer Blake?" she asked. When I nodded, she extended her hand. "I'm Margaret Sutton, Derek's sister. He told me what you did for Helen Morse, how you paid him off when you could have just let her fight it out in court. My brother isn't good with words or emotions, but he wanted me to give you this." She handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for $10,000 made out to May's place, along with a note written in blocky masculine handwriting for the operating fund. "From someone who learned about integrity from watching you. Thank you for showing me what doing the right thing looks like. DS." I felt tears spring to my eyes. Even Derek Sutton, the house flipper who'd been part of Carol's schemes, had been moved to generosity by witnessing genuine goodness. May's legacy was already spreading in ways I hadn't imagined, touching people and changing them through simple acts of mercy and justice combined. As the afternoon progressed, I watched the space fill with exactly the kind of community May had envisioned. Ray stood beside me as we gave tours, pointing out the craftsmanship in the woodwork he'd restored, and for the first time in over a year, we felt like father and daughter again. Upstairs, Megan was in the art room teaching her first official class, surrounded by a dozen delighted seniors learning watercolor techniques. Her face was animated and joyful in a way I hadn't seen since before May's death. Carol wasn't there, still serving her sentence in county jail, but I'd made a deliberate choice about her place in this story. In the entrance hall, among photos of May from different eras, I'd included one picture of her holding toddler Carol, both smiling. It was a reminder that love doesn't erase people even when they fail us spectacularly, that May's capacity for grace extended even to those who'd betrayed her most deeply. As the sun began its descent, and the last visitors reluctantly departed, I found myself alone on the front porch, settling into one of the rocking chairs where May used to sit. I pulled out the final envelope from May's safety deposit box, the one marked, "Read when May's place opens." My hands trembled slightly as I broke the seal. May's handwriting covered a single page, shakier than in her earlier letters, but still unmistakably hers. "My darling Jenny, you read the fine print. You chose honor over ease. You built beauty from ashes. I'm so proud of the woman you've become, prouder than words can express. Now I have one final instruction for you. Live your life fully. Love fiercely. Don't let the battles you've fought harden your heart. This house is no longer mine or yours. It belongs to everyone who needs it, and that's exactly how it should be. You've honored my memory better than I ever dreamed possible. All my love always and forever. Grandma May." I folded the letter carefully, pressing it against my heart, letting the tears flow freely now that I was alone. But they weren't tears of grief anymore. They were tears of completion, of peace, of gratitude, for a grandmother who'd loved me enough to prepare me for the hardest journey of my life. The screen door creaked open behind me, and Mrs. Chen emerged, carrying 2 cups of tea. She settled into the rocking chair beside mine without asking, handing me one of the steaming cups, and we sat together in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the streetlights flicker on as dusk deepened. "Your grandmother used to say something I've never forgotten," Mrs. Chen said finally, her voice soft but clear. She'd say, "The fine print of life is written in what we do not, what we say. Words are easy, actions reveal who we really are." She looked at me with eyes full of warmth. "You've written a beautiful story, dear. Not just with this place, but with how you've handled everything. The mercy you showed Helen, the grace you extended to Ray and Megan, even the way you've refused to be consumed by bitterness toward Carol. That's the real legacy." I smiled through my tears, squeezing her hand. We all did, Mrs. Chen. Every person who showed up to help, every volunteer who believed in May's vision, every person willing to choose love over judgment. We all wrote this story together. We sat rocking gently as darkness fell completely, and I could hear laughter drifting from inside where a few volunteers were finishing cleanup. The sign above the door caught the porch light glowing softly. May's place where everyone belongs. This wasn't an ending, I realized. It was a beginning, the start of something that would outlive all of us, carrying May's values forward into a future she'd never see, but had made possible through careful planning and boundless love. The fine print of her life revealed at last, written not in legal documents, but in changed hearts and transformed lives. And that, I understood finally, was the inheritance that truly mattered. And that's Jennifer's story. A story about betrayal, yes, but more importantly about integrity, forgiveness, and the kind of legacy that truly matters. May didn't just leave Jennifer a house or money. She left her a roadmap for how to be human in the face of cruelty, how to choose grace without becoming a doormat, how to build something beautiful from the ashes of family destruction. What do you think? Did Jennifer make the right choices? Should she have been harder on Carol, or was her mercy exactly what May would have wanted? And here's the big question. If you inherited a similar situation, could you show the same grace Jennifer did, or would you have chosen pure revenge? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I'm genuinely curious about your perspective. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We share true stories like this every week, stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary moral dilemmas. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, life's most important lessons are always written in the fine print. Thanks for listening.